Good evening, everybody. Tonight, we're going to be debating the case for atheism. And to start us out, we have Mark Reed. Thank you, everybody, for being here. The floor is all yours, Mark.
Oh, thank you very much. And I do have a screen to share if you could be so kind, Ryan. I want to thank Ryan for moderating, my opponents for being here, and of course, my partner, Leo. And thank you for joining us today. Am I up and running?
You are up and running.
Beautiful. Okay, so today we're going through the case for atheism, and I'll sort of begin by sort of defining atheism in general. Its polysemy sort has multiple definitions depending on the context. The context of general speech may be put as a disbelief or lack of belief in gods. That's a very broad definition, though. While that general definition of atheism is sort of used, tonight we're going to be arguing for the atheism defined in the philosophy of religion. It's also known generally as hard atheism or strong atheism. So while atheism is a lack of belief in God or gods, the strong atheism position is one that not only lacks a belief, but it says that no God exists. It's a subtle distinction, but it is an important one because this comes with a positive claim. Even that provisional belief, some justification should be proffered as to why the belief is held, which is what I'll be going into tonight. This definition, we'll find, is very vague and it's meant to encompass any God. It needs a little explanation to break down what I'm talking about. Non-material and atemporal means that it does not necessarily exist in space-time, or at least is not hindered by them or transcends space-time. Something that is necessary is the cause or origin for things, but is not caused itself, making it beholden to no other entity or thing. An agent is something that can think, make decisions, and take actions. Something that has agency. This assumes that a mind is involved in some way and that can choose what action to take or not to take. If this definition is a problem for my opponents, we can narrow it down to a more local level, but this should encompass any God that I could possibly think of. So there's a few reasons to sort of establish why God as a proposition should not only be disbelieved, it should be believed that no God in fact exists. When we look at how to evaluate a claim, unfalsifiable claims are not worth considering for a truth status if there's no way that they can be falsified. For instance, Carl Sagan may have an invisible, immaterial, all-powerful dragon in their garage, but if there's no way to falsify or investigate the truth of the claim, then it should be considered false until the time exists that some sort of criteria for falsification can be established. Because the claim of the God comes with the assertion that it accounts for all possible things, then by its nature, it's unfalsifiable, as no set of circumstances would ever falsify the God or the immaterial dragon. For this debate, I'll be asking our opponents what standard of falsification that they would use. So verificationism is the doctrine that states that a truth statement is only true if it can be verified either with empirical senses or by pure logic, and a God seems to fail on either category. The important part is that we only have confidence in things because they continue to show themselves to be true. However, we can't observe all cases everywhere. For instance, you could say a heavy object release will fall down, but the question can be asked, have you observed all instances of things falling down at all times in all locations? We do not need to observe all things at all times to know that this is not possible. Enough repeated instances can allow us to say, I know something heavy will fall when I release it. This claim is easily falsifiable. A single instance of being on the earth and something floating up will falsify it. But until that time, we're justified in saying that heavy things when dropped on the earth will drop and not float upwards. So any God that interacts with the world, as the claim comes from theists, should be detectable on some physical level, as long as it interacts with the physical world. If a God is the cause of the universe, it should be detectable on some level. There's lots of claims God's responsible, again, without falsification. An appeal to design hiddenness or some other excuse must be made for lack of evidence. But again, the intangible dragon could also use hiddenness for the same criteria. I would demand that we have some sort of criteria for falsibility for the God to even be meaningfully considered. Now, a hidden God or a deist God that doesn't interact with the world is just as bad because there's no way to show such a God exists. Again, it's unfalsifiable. The main reason I believe no gods exist because we are beginning to understand the mind, and it seems a mind cannot exist without the brain. We have trillions of minds, and the complexity of mind is directly linked to the complexity of the brain. Indeed, if a brain is damaged, the mind is too. If a brain is split, then the mind is split too. Now, notice I'm not saying that a mind without a brain is impossible. However, I do have a reasonable provisional belief based upon what humans have learned about minds, that a mind without the neurons and neurochemical reactors of the brain seems antithetical to the process we understand. Again, I have not scoured the entire universe for brainless minds, obviously, but again, the same is true of dropping something heavy. I'm justified to say that minds require brains until such a time as I am presented with a mind without a brain. That is a justified belief. So again, I want to make it clear I'm not saying it's logically impossible for a mind without a brain to exist, and I'm not just basing my argument on the existence of minds with brains. Consider if I say all human children are delivered via childbirth and not stork. A theist may say, have you observed every childbirth ever performed by humans? Of course not. But we understand the process of how children come about. If someone suggests that a magical, intangible, invisible stork delivered the babies, but cannot be falsified, am I then justified in saying that not all children are born via a natural process? Of course not. The unfalsifiability of the magic stork claim rules it out as a candidate explanation, as it cannot be investigated. Like what's all minds all requiring the structure of the brain to process, and the entire process depends on synapses, chemicals, neurotransmitters. I can confidently reject the idea that mind exists somewhere without a brain until this is shown to be plausible, much less possible. If one of my esteemed opponents wishes to disabuse me of this claim, then all they have to do is show the mind without a brain, and I will certainly soften my stance. As it stands, I'm confident that minds require brains, as I am that children are born through natural processes and not through magic storks. I don't know how this can be achieved to show this, and that is not my problem. It's up to my opponents to show a brainless mind. And thank you. I'll wrap it up there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your opening statement there, Mark Reed. Just want to remind everybody here at Modern Day Debate, we are a neutral platform hosting debates on science, politics, religion. We hope you feel welcome here. And also, DebateCon 4 is coming up. It's going to be in Dallas, Texas. So check out the crowdfund. Get your tickets in the link below. Leo, we're going to hand it over to you for your up to 6-minute introductory statement. Thanks for being here, Leo.
Thank you. So the subject of tonight's discussion is the case for atheism. So first, let's start with definitions. I take atheism to be the belief that gods do not exist, and that is the claim that I intend to defend here. I will be presenting a logical argument from evil against God, and for that I need to define what I mean by God. I take the classically theistic definition that most people who believe in God are probably going to hold to, though there are people who don't. Non-classical theists exist. And God, defined by classical theism, at least broadly, there are some specific details debated amongst theologians, but that's not relevant for tonight's discussion. God, under classical theism, is a singular being that is omnipotent, omniscient, or all-knowing, and morally perfect. And by morally perfect, I just mean that God always seeks to do the best thing he can do. God always seeks to maximize goodness. And by goodness, and when I say goodness, I'm talking about the good that comes, the one standard of good that comes from God's nature, because the logical argument from evil is an internal critique. And I take good, the good, to be the action guiding norm. That is, good, what is good is that which ought to be done, all things considered. So if God is morally perfect, then God always seeks to maximize the good, then God always seeks what's best, which would logically entail that given God's omnipotence, anything that he desires just comes about. God never fails to actualize his desires, which means that if God truly seeks the best, then we live in the best of all possible worlds, except the theist either has to bite the seriously large and very fast-moving bullet and claim that the murder of 6 million Jews is good, or it seems that we don't live in the best of all possible worlds, a world which everything which occurs is what ought to occur, all things considered, and no things which ought not to occur ever do. That is how I define the best of all possible worlds, the best world, the one that God would make. If this isn't it, then it seems that this specific notion of God does not exist. There are a lot of nuances to this discussion. There's objections like free will, skeptical theism. There's other theodicies that people have developed. I'm willing to talk about those, but for the sake of brevity, I want to keep this simple and to the point and just outline broadly what the contradiction is between the idea of an all-powerful, morally perfect God and things that immediately, intuitively seem very, very evil to us in the world existing. These both cannot obtain at the same time. And so if we go with our immediate intuition that very, very evil things have and continue to happen in the world, like the murder of 6 million Jews, then it seems that God, as according to classical theism, does not exist. And I'll end there.
All right. Thank you for that, Leo. And thank you, everybody, for being here. We're going to hand the floor over to Arden and Jordan. For the first time ever, I think, on Modern Day Debate, we have a Christian and a Muslim teaming up against the hard atheists. So, Arden and Jordan, who would like to go first? We should have established this beforehand.
He can go. It's fine.
Excellent. Arden, the floor is all yours.
Yeah,
Thanks for being here.
It's Aiden, by the way, just to clarify.
Oh, Aiden, so much. Sorry. Yeah, it's in my nature to apologize excessively as a Canadian, but your 6-minute intro and the floor is all yours.
Alrighty, so I wanted to say thank you very much to Modern Day Debate for hosting this debate. I'm pretty excited for it because we get to see a positive case made for atheism, which is pretty rare, and I have immense respect for my interlocutors today for taking up such a challenge. And I'm also pretty excited because I get to try out an argument for God's existence of my own design, which, as it turns out from Mark's opening, it's actually going to end up being pretty relevant. First, I'd like to give a little critique of the kind of atheism presented in this debate. So Mark's argument was that we need to provide an example of a non-physical sort of mind without a brain. Essentially, we would need to prove metaphysical dualism. I'm perfectly happy to contend that metaphysical dualism is absolutely true. But I would prefer to first take it from the perspective of critiquing a sort of physicalist approach to the mind-body problem. Physicalism, as a sort of metaphysical sort of claim, is the idea that, it could mean two things. One, it could mean that absolutely everything in the universe is made of physical stuff, or it could just mean that it could just apply specifically to the mind-body problem, that mind is purely physical. There are several problems with the physicalism as a theory of mind. One of those being that, one, it's very reductionistic. And as a reductionistic framework, it tends to limit its scope for what it's looking for and its ability to explain phenomena that we do observe in the mind. What that ends up happening because of that is that occasionally we will observe phenomenon that seems to point to perhaps dualism or some sort of non-physicalist explanation for the mind-body problem. But because physicalism is reductionistic, it will simply say, well, that's a mystery, we just don't know, and never make an attempt to solve that mystery, essentially, and just sort of leave us hanging. An example of such a phenomenon, which I will talk about later in the opening discussion, would be something called terminal lucidity. Terminal lucidity is a phenomenon where essentially the physical structure of the brain is completely damaged, and it can be damaged for whatever reason you like, from dementia to even Huntington's, classic brain damage, drug use, you name it. Anything that can damage the mind, terminal lucidity could still apply. And what would happen in the case of terminal lucidity is that despite the damaged structure of the brain, let's say that this damaged structure causes memory loss or an inability to speak or any sort of impaired brain function whatsoever, we have observed phenomenon where the structure of the brain is still damaged, or at least we seem to believe it's still damaged. We have all evidence points to the fact that it's still damaged, and yet their functionality seems to return moments before death. So, for example, dementia patients all of a sudden start remembering their children's names when they had previously forgotten them. Or maybe they weren't able to walk. My mother's a palliative care nurse, for example. She's actually observed this herself, where there was a man who had dementia and he couldn't walk for years. And then moments before he died, he got up, cleaned his whole house, and then died. And that's just it. Now, of course, when it comes to physicalism, many physicalist theories have been put forward to explain such a phenomenon, and each and every single one of them fails. Outside of the brain essentially healing rapidly like Deadpool, there doesn't seem to be any physical explanation for how the memories can remain and still be accessible when the physical structure doesn't remain. That seems to point to the idea that there is some sort of immaterial mind at play here. Again, that's something I'd like to go further into detail with later. I want to sort of get through it. And as for the problem of evil that Leophilius put forward, the problem with the problem of evil, I guess, is that we're going to, in order to even have that discussion, we're going to have to come to an agreement on the metaphysical nature of what good and evil actually means. And that's going to be a very difficult thing, because I would argue, for example, that what morality actually is that I would argue metaphysically it's dimensional. In the same way that you might have a dimension of space and time, you would also have a dimension of morality. And in the same way, like, so it would be like a sort of continuum of like good and bad sort of thing. In the same way you'd have a continuum of left and right on a spatial dimension. Now, of course, in the same way that with space, it doesn't metaphysically make sense to have a right without a left, or an up without a down. It doesn't make sense for there to be a good without, at the very least, the potential for evil to exist. It doesn't actually make sense. You actually need one for the other kind of thing. Now, you might disagree with that, and that's fine. This isn't a metaphysical necessity. I could be wrong on my view on morality, but that's the point. In order for the problem of evil to hold, it has to be a sort of internal critique of the conflict between our metaphysical claims about morality, as well as the evil that should not exist according to those metaphysical claims. But I'm just establishing that first of all, morality has to be objective. Most atheists, I'm not saying this is all atheists, but most atheists would argue that morality is not objective. But obviously within the theistic worldview, it is. So inevitably, you're going to have to accept some sort of like a lot of my metaphysical arguments for what morality is and what the nature of its necessary nature is. In which case, because you obviously can't bring an outside morality system that doesn't apply to theism to critique the theism to create the problem of evil. That would just be a sort of useless sort of argument. Now, I'm going to quickly try to give a brief overview of my argument for God's existence. And I call it the argument from a priori knowledge. I've never seen this argument done before. It's probably been done before. I'm not that creative or anything, but I've never seen it done before. So here it is. It's not the presuppositional argument, but it is an argument that aims to establish three main points. One, that we have a priori knowledge. And a priori knowledge just means knowledge gained without an experience or without empirical experience. So anything that you've learned without the five senses, and also for the purposes of this argument, without instinct. So genetic instinct is not a priori knowledge for the purposes of this argument. The point number two is that if we have a priori knowledge, it requires a causal explanation for how we got there. And the final point is that that causal explanation is identified as God. I'd like to go into more detail. That's all the time I got.
All right. Thank you, Aiden, for your opening statement there. And also sorry about the typo. We're going to get that fixed right away. Now, thank you also here, Jordan. It's also your debut here at Modern Day Debate. Up to 6 minutes to present your case from the Muslim perspective. Thank you for being here, Jordan.
Yeah, good to be here. So the case that the first point that I want to make is that it's not even just it's not really a Muslim thing. It's just a general point that I think the framing of these debates, I think they sometimes go a little bit off the rails, I guess I want to say, that we end up talking past each other, and I think it could be fixed very easily. I think there's a misunderstanding on both sides that it's not really about empiricism or factuality. That's not what we're talking about, at least theists. It's more about it's called belief for a reason. We believe it. It may not be 100% empirical or factual, but belief is more what's at play here. So it is true that I can't 100% prove that I'm right. I could be wrong. I'm open to that possibility. I'm not so arrogant to the point where I'd say I'm certain that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. But again, it's not a question of facts or or empiricism. It's more about uh, faith. It's more about, we call it faith, we call it belief for a reason. That was never, it was never historic. Even when you look back at old, uh, very old religions, that was never the point. The point was, oh, I'm gonna one up a person who disagrees with me by presenting facts and evidence for my beliefs. It's like, that's not the point. Again, belief is the point, and it's not like the people who believe those things were stupid. I mean, the people, like, for instance, in my religion of Islam, there was a golden age where you had brilliant people who invented things like, there was the first steps toward the scientific method. The camera was invented by a Muslim, an early version of it, at least. There were strides being made in medicine, by Islamic scientists. Hindu scientists, same thing with astrology and plastic surgery, and things like that. So these were not stupid people. They balanced faith and science at the same time. So we especially, in what I would broadly call the West, even though I don't like terms like that necessarily, these people were able to balance faith with science and empiricism and logic, and they did it um, in a way that was very practical, very balanced, and I think that they deserve credit for that. And I think that it's only in the last few hundred years where we've gotten this notion that science is one thing and religion is another. It's like, that was not historically the case, and I don't think it's historically the case, or I don't think it's the case today. So that's what I wanted to clarify is, I think we're talking past each other, and I think it's, the framing is wrong. I think what we're talking about, at least from the theistic side, is a question of belief, and as Aiden said, more about metaphysics than actual material, uh, than actual materialism. I kind of lost my train of thought here, but I think we're talking about metaphysics rather than physics and material things. So that's pretty much all I have to say.
All right, thank you for your introductory statement there, Jordan, and Arden for being, or Aiden, sorry, for being here. I just fixed the thing, so I'm not going to do that again. There we go. All right, and I'm going to keep cropping that, everybody. So we're going to kick it into our open discussion. Thanks for being here, everybody in the live chat. Hit the like button, share this out in the spaces where you like to have these discussions. And I just want to remind you that all of our guests are going to be linked in our description, wherever you can find them. We're going to get those links up, and those are also going to be included in our podcast. So we'll kick it back to the other side to get us into our open discussion. Thanks again, everybody, for being here.
You want to go first, Mark, since you went first in the delivery?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I'd like to focus on sort of the a priori knowledge that you're sort of saying that we have, that's not instinct and not sort of intuitive things. But what a priori knowledge do humans have that is not taught to them or a product of instinct? What is that?
So that's a good question. So I would argue that the concept of, I would call it the concept of, it's a bit abstract, but the concept of therefore, basically, or the ability to interpret in a sense. What I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you've
inductive
got
and deductive thinking. I think that's what you mean when you say therefore, is like a form of reasoning.
Kind of. It's more the ability to learn. Like, the example I was about to give is like, how is it that a person comes to learn induction? Like, because most, even kids, have a sort of intuitive sense of induction by the time that they're born, and that could very easily be impressed upon them on an early age, let's say. But to provide that as an example,
that's not necessarily true. Babies don't even have object permanence. So it means that once an object leaves a baby's sight, they basically think it ceases to exist. They don't even have the idea that, like, not induction, and not even the idea that something will exist past their immediate sensory perception of it.
Yeah, I agree. So that's what I meant. Like, so like induction would be an example of something that's learned at a very early age. And like, so if we were to provide an example, maybe when babies start to observe the uniformity of nature, let's say they say like, oh, I see the sun come up, it happens every day, therefore there must be some sort of consistency to nature, right? That's
But
probably how it's sort of.
wouldn't that
Wouldn't that
be
be learned?
empirical knowledge? Because that's learned through repeated experience.
Yeah.
I don't think that would be. So like an example of a priori knowledge would be something like that all squares are polygons. That's an example of, you don't need to go out into the world or do any sort of empirical investigating to know that squares are polygons, that all squares are polygons. I suppose something like maybe that all bachelors are unmarried men could be considered a form of like a priori knowledge.
Right.
But yeah, a priori knowledge is the things that we know largely just through reasoning and not through any form of experience or empirical investigation.
But I'm getting the feeling that that's not what Aiden's talking about when he's talking about a priori knowledge. So I think he's sort of suggesting that a mind comes equipped with some sort of knowledge that isn't learnt through the material world around them and isn't a product of instinct.
Well, whether or not this it comes equipped at, say, birth isn't really the important part. It's it could be and it might not. It doesn't have to be. It's possible that it could have happened by some other means. But that's kind of what the argument sort of explores. So to sort of return it back to induction, I don't believe induction would be an a priori thing, but our ability to learn induction is. So if we take it back to that example of the like seeing the sun come up, that's laid out in a syllogism, right? Premise 1, I see the sun come up. That's an empirical proposition. Premise 2, I see it come up every day, also empirical proposition. But then you have the conclusion that follows from that. Therefore, there must be a consistency to nature. That therefore in the sentence, and that's why I mentioned the therefore before, that therefore in the sentence isn't empirical. Nowhere in the above empirical propositions do you actually have that therefore contained in the empirical experience. It's entirely possible that we could have just evolved to be purely empirical creatures that only had those two propositions. I see the sun come up. I see it happen every day. There's no need to add that third thing, uniformity of nature. That's something we bring to the table. That's something we do through our capacity for interpretation. It doesn't seem to be included in the empirical experience.
Yeah, and
so
I'm saying that that's learnt. I'm saying that that's learnt because you have like a baby when it's very, very young, when it's newborn, it doesn't have that object permanence. So the mother walks away, it's vanished. The mother comes back, therefore the mother didn't vanish. No, what happens is the mother walks away again and the baby thinks that they vanished again. Right. So this isn't something that they learn the uniformity of nature as they go along. And one of those things is even being self-aware. Like we know from scientific studies that the baby, for the first, I think, week or so of its life, it doesn't have any sense of self. It thinks also it doesn't have an identity. It thinks that it and the mother, he or she or the mother, are the same thing. I don't mean to refer to a baby as it. Like I don't hate kids that much. Like so these things are things that are learnt. And yeah, I get that the mind is very it adapts and it learns these things sort of outwards, but it's very hard for us to wrap around our heads around the idea that a baby won't have this idea of self. It thinks that it's the mother, and it won't have this idea that things remain after they leave. It thinks they vanish. These are things that the mind has to learn as it goes along, but it is aided by those instinctual things. That repeated actions cause the synapses to develop these connections, which then connect the events to one another. I will grant you that that's amazing, but I have no reason to think it's anything other than physical formation of synapses through repeated observations of empirical data.
So there's also a couple other things here. The first thing is that the word therefore is just part of a rule of inference and logic. I mean, I don't find anything particularly impressive about that word. I guess I'm failing to see. Also, the argument that you gave, the premise, conclusion, the syllogism, could just be simplified to, I observe the sun to rise every day, therefore the sun will rise every day. But then you're just immediately going to run into problems of induction, because from that statement alone, you can't actually conclude, at least not through any valid rule of inference that I know, that the sun will rise every day in the future. I mean, not that like Hume's problem of induction or other problems of induction like make it so we can't use induction and it's bunk. It just means that it's an unjustified way of inferring things. It works. We can obviously see that it works, but it is unjustified.
But I think I'm confident in saying that minds need brains, as I am confident in saying the sun will rise tomorrow. I think that that's more than reasonable inference, given that the amount of and sort of, so you've suggested dualism, but I don't like the thing that you pointed to for dualism, the a priori knowledge. It doesn't seem like I'm sort of asking for one example of this knowledge, but it doesn't seem like that is in fact an example of some sort of knowledge that isn't gained as we go along.
Well, see, when it comes to because you mentioned that babies don't have object permanence, right? And I did mention that induction is learned, so I agree with you there. But how is it possible to learn that without that, therefore? And Leophilius actually made a good point that that idea of induction isn't necessarily properly justified. That's true. In fact, the a priori knowledge I'm talking about could very well be wrong or right for all I care. I'm talking about where it causally comes from, not whether or not it's has any reference to truth or anything like that. So for all I know, God could have put it there to deceive us. As far as the argument could, I mean, I don't think he did, obviously. But in terms of whether or not it establishes dualism or the existence of God or not, causally speaking, first of all, I don't believe you've actually sort of addressed the point where it's the therefore itself is not actually causally contained. There's no empirical impression that can give you that therefore. You use the therefore to interpret the empirical impressions as to come to the conclusion of induction. But in order to use therefore to interpret the empirical impressions, it has to already be there in your head. And let's say, oh, well, maybe you just learn what it means maybe through school or something. Your teachers probably tell you the definitions of words all the time. But how are you supposed to look at let's say somebody's pointing to a chalkboard and saying, therefore, this is what it means. If you don't have that concept already in your head, if you don't have that ability to make those therefore statements, the only way you could learn those therefore statements is if you have the ability to interpret. So how do you interpret the ability to interpret into your head? Basically, it can't really be done.
No, I answered that. I answered that. You're just thinking of the word therefore. What I'm sort of alluding to is the concept of therefore. That when you have synapse patterns that are repeated and they become, that's where the therefore comes from. The synapse being strengthened to say, hey, every time this happens, this is the result, and making that connection in the brain is the therefore.
I want to get.
So it's the synaptic connection.
I want to get Jordan in here, fellas, and get some of his thoughts. I also want to remind our live chat that we will be having a Q&A at the end of this. So get your super chats in for your questions on our debate, which is the case for hard atheism. Essentially, is what we're doing. So Jordan, the floor is yours.
I don't really know where to start, but I mean, I don't necessarily agree with a priori arguments, but I understand what Aiden's saying. I get it, but I also agree with some of the points that our opponents are making. It's a fair question. I think what I would ask is why is it not conceivable? I guess what I'm trying to understand is why does it have to be either or? Either God did something or he didn't. Why can't it be a mixture of both where
well, because that would be just impossible. That would just be a contradiction. To say that any agent both does something and does not do the same thing in the same sense at the same time would be just an explicit contradiction.
And really, if we're talking atheism, we're talking about, does a God exist? So in order for it to be true and not true, you would have to say a God both exists and doesn't exist. So that's a sort of, whether God exists or does not exist is a true dichotomy. It either is true or it's not true. It can't really be a mixture of both.
Well, I think I apologize. What I meant was you were talking something about you mentioned something, Matt, about the like some sort of synapse
Mark.
process or something like that.
Yeah. So basically what's under discussion is, I think that the mind is entirely dependent on the brain. I think it's all physical, it's all neurosynapses and chemicals and things like that. What Aiden is proffering is the idea of mind-body dualism, that the mind exists in somehow independently of the brain and has some sort of while it relies on the brain to maybe express itself. And I don't want to put words into your mouth, Aiden, but I do want to explain the difference. That maybe the mind needs to be expressed through the brain, but it sort of has its own identity in some way that is not dependent on a physical structure. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Aiden?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Because I guess, I just don't see how it's mutually exclusive that a god could have created beings that are capable of the process you're talking about, and that process going on. I just don't see why those things are mutually exclusive. Like it, I know you
Right.
don't believe it. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
from my point of view, I don't see a logical contradiction. I think that's a false dichotomy, is what I'm saying.
Well, in my presentation, as I said, I don't think it's impossible that there's a God. But what the claim to me being presented is that there is an unfalsifiable deity that basically has a mind but does not have a physical brain. And what I'm saying is that entailment, from what I understand of how minds work and their dependence on a brain, I don't see how that is possible. I'm not saying it's impossible. I would just, I would need, it really rules out the idea of a God for me, because as far as I know, and this is my belief and a justified belief, so I claim as far as I know, minds need brains. That's it.
To sort of, sorry, Jordan, you go first.
Yeah. I don't really think God has a mind in the way that living creatures, like physical creatures, do. I don't think God necessarily has.
Does God have desires? Does God desire things? I mean, there's things God wants, isn't there?
It's possible.
I would imagine there's things God wants. Like,
Yes.
Doesn't God want everybody to be saved, get whatever that means in whatever particular religion?
And does God make choices? Can God choose between one option and another option?
Yeah, that's another good question. Can God make choices?
Yes.
Can God act with intention?
Yes. But again,
so then what do you mean when you say he's not a mind? That seems exactly like a mind. He's got desires, he acts with intention. I would presume God has emotions. He probably behaves normatively. That means that like he does what he thinks he should based on the evaluation of his standards. I would presume God does all those things. That's what a mind is.
Right. I get, but what I'm saying is not, I guess what I should have said is, I don't think he has a brain. I think that.
Me too.
Yeah. So I guess we agree on that then.
Well, but that's the argument, is that Mark is saying if he doesn't have a brain, given that the only minds he's seen that we've ever observed ever have brains, it's very, very unlikely that there are minds that don't have brains. And so therefore, if God is a mind without a brain, if he's an immaterial mind, then it is very, very likely that God does not exist.
But I'm saying you're thinking of it in material terms. If God is immaterial, then you can't ascribe material properties to him that he
Yeah, but
doesn't
desires aren't material properties. Desires
But
can be
brains
granted as
are.
not.
But brains
If I
are.
could
Intention
sort of-
and normativity are sometimes considered
Go ahead,
non-natural
Aiden.
properties as well.
Go ahead.
I just got a bit of a question for the atheist. So if you're approaching this from the perspective of physicalism in terms of a theory of mind, then ultimately, on a metaphysical level, you can't actually tell the difference between a physical process, just an ordinary physical process, and a living thing. Fundamentally speaking, living things are just physical processes. They're basically the same thing. There might be different types and different levels of complexity, but ultimately they're pretty much the same thing. So then,
Do you have a living thing that's not a physical process?
well, it doesn't matter even if I didn't. But what I'm trying to say here, Mark, is that when you talked about falsifiability at the beginning of your speech, you're kind of biting yourself in the tail here, because it sort of becomes unfalsifiable as to whether or not the beginning of the universe is a separate thing from the outset, because it's like, if the beginning of the universe was a mind, like a consciousness, let's say, even if it's physical, like you and me, then
Well,
how do
Mark,
we
Mark, what about
metaphysically?
air? You can't see air, but it exists.
Well, we can
We
physically
can
detect
observe
it.
it. Yeah.
You
So
can,
when
like,
we're
feel it.
talking about empirical observations and sort of unfalsifiability, we can make, like, you can
Yeah, I agree.
falsify whether there's air somewhere. Yeah, sure. So, but what you're talking about, an immaterial, invisible, undetectable mind, which isn't falsifiable at the moment. And my challenge to you would be to come up with some way to falsify it. Just like we have these physical processes, and you might say, and my example was that if you have,
I
you
don't
know,
think
I
you
say,
have to
hey,
falsify
well, just
beliefs.
let
That's
me
my point.
let me.
I don't think you have to falsify beliefs. You know,
Well, that's where I would
you
disagree with you, Jordan. I do think I actually agree with Mark that a certain level of falsifiability on both sides is kind of needed. Um, uh, Again, like, this debate is the hard case for atheism, so
right,
they have to
right,
provide something,
right.
and so do
Yeah,
we.
and I think
And
I get what you're saying, that beliefs, like, you're not making a knowledge claim, it's just a belief, and that's fine.
Right.
But at some point you have to acknowledge that you have a belief with no justification behind it. And I did want to go on at some point to how, like, if we have two contradictory beliefs, like I believe there is no God and you believe there is a God, how do we tell who's right? And how do we tell, how, and the
But I've
whole
also
idea of
agreed with you at some parts of this debate. I've agreed with you
sure.
at some parts. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, most people will agree on some things. Like, most people in this world will agree on commonalities. That's not a surprise. It's just like, when we're talking about epistemology, we're talking about, how do you know that what your beliefs are is actually true ontologically? Like, so in reality are
Right,
in
right.
fact true, or metaphysically true. And so if I have a sort of, what I want to do is have a good, reasonable justification for why what I believe is true or likely true is the best way to go through life. And for that, you need a process to show that what you believe can in fact be falsified. Because while, due to what Leo was saying, the problem of induction, we can't always rely on induction to show that something is true, we can definitely falsify things by finding the exception, right? So it was like, if somebody sort of says, hey, I know that childbirth is a natural process that is, done all this, and someone says, hey, there's a magical stork that delivers it. Well, it's unfalsifiable because it's an immaterial, invisible, magical stork that, and you've never checked every single time someone's birthed a child. So how can you say that the stork doesn't exist? Well, it's because of the understanding the process, and the billions of times that we've had births, we've never observed a stork. I think, to say, hey, then I have a higher level of confidence that that's a natural process. If you do have an example of a mind without a brain, I would certainly soften my position to agnostic, or, sort of soft atheism, depending on how you're using the terms. But I think that, with understanding the process of how minds
if you want a
work,
material example, jellyfish.
okay,
Jellyfish don't have
what do you
brains,
mean?
but they have minds.
No, they don't
Well, they
have
do.
brains, and they
It
don't
depends
have
on what you mean
minds.
by brain, because they do have sets of neurons. So I mean, it just comes down to what we mean by brain. What humans generally mean by brain? No, jellyfish don't have them, but they do have neurons.
So,
Yeah,
Mark, how
and so
would you define brain
well,
then? Let's go from
yeah,
there.
so the complexity of the mind seems to be dependent on the complexity of the brain. So something like a jellyfish, which has neural receptors and neural pathways, generally they will just be able to react instinctively, just like plants react instinctively based upon a set of parameters. They will always react in the same way. What I'm talking about with a mind is being an agent, an ability to make conscious decisions of the actions being performed. Because
Mhm.
while a jellyfish doesn't have a brain, it can't seem to consciously decide to do things. It will always respond to the same stimuli in exactly the same way.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't define a something that is just reacting to the stimuli, like a bacteria or something like that, as having a mind. I think that would be a higher level of
Mhm.
consciousness.
Mhm. Yeah, that's another good example. Yeah, that's another. I probably should have gone with that one. uh, the bacteria
So
example.
with the sort of going back to the immaterial mind, you mentioned that the capacity to make decisions, right?
Yeah.
Um, wouldn't under physicalism that not necessarily come through, or is I would have to ask the question: is free will a sort of emergent property, or do you guys not believe in free will? Like, because
I
that's
was
kind
I'm a
of
going to
what
ask
I'm
about
getting
that
at.
compatibilist.
too.
I'm a compatibilist.
Yeah.
So what I would say is that
Yeah.
you can have free will. What the word I would prefer to use is volition, which is the ability to make choices despite things being deterministic. In fact, I don't know what it would mean to engage in decision making from literally zero prior information or prior
Mhm.
factors or anything like that. Any with literally zero antecedent causes, antecedent
Mhm.
factors or considerations. I don't know what decision making is. And
I'm a
this is one of the
compatibilist too. I
problems
agree
with
with you on that. I agree
libertarian
with you.
free will is the idea that libertarian free will, people often say, well, the reasons are the source of our choices, but why that reason versus another reason? You can just ask the why question
Right.
and it either goes back ad infinitum or it stops someplace, at which point all decisions you ever make just become arbitrary. So the whole concept of decision making, I would say, needs something physical. You need something like time, a past, an ability to record that past, the ability to understand what's going on around you. You need some sort of what's the term? Not like some sort of predictive capability, the ability to like plan ahead of forward
Yeah. See
thinkingness,
consequences.
all
Yeah.
of these things to make decisions. And I don't know how one has that without like physical systems and processes and functions taking place.
Well,
Nor have I
I
ever
don't
seen an
know.
example of it.
I don't know how you have that with physical systems. I don't want to get too much into a discussion of free will, but in terms of whether or not, purely physical processes can give you those predictive things, I don't see that necessarily emerging from physical processes.
Well, I choose
So
vanilla ice cream because I like it better than
Mhm.
chocolate. Because of my ability to taste, which is a physical thing. If you cut out your tongue, you will not taste things because it's physical. Um,
Mhm.
I that's the reason why. And so I based on the fact that I like vanilla ice cream, that's what I will choose over chocolate, at least most of the
Right.
time, because I do still like chocolate ice cream. I just like
Mhm.
vanilla more. So that's an
Right.
Yeah.
antecedent
But
factor.
I
But
have
you
to
might
admit that
have
I have
like
to admit
green tea ice
I'm
cream. You might have green tea ice cream cross you and you've never had it before and decide to go with that one based upon the fact that you haven't had it before. But
Mm-hmm.
that decision may be based upon what you think the taste will be, not
And those are two
actually what
different
it is.
decisions.
but
Two
I
different
I
Right.
decisions, both with antecedent factors.
All right, let's let
I
Jordan
have to
here.
admit, but I have to admit, I'm a compatibilist too. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that perspective. Yeah, just wanted to say that.
Okay.
Right on. There's actually a lot of theists I know, particularly in the New Age, that are compatibilists, and I even know
Yeah.
a decent amount that are physicalists as well, with
Mhm.
respect to the mind.
I think that the hard determinists do just to sort of address what you're saying, Aiden. I think that the hard determinists do have points that there are a number of leading factors that may go into what that decision is, but I'm not entirely convinced of that. I do see what they're getting at, but I don't know how we could falsify free will or determinism at all. That's the
Mm-hmm.
problem. Like anything that you decide to choose to disprove determinism, you could say it's determined. So it seems again to fit into that category of unfalsifiability to me. which means that it's not really even a meaningful question to ask. It seems like even if we do not have free will, we have the illusion of free will, and it seems entirely dependent on this illusion of free will to function. So, it may be, they may be correct, that everything is determined by priors, but I don't believe that, and I don't know how you could prove that.
Yeah, obviously I don't want to get too much into the free will side of things, but it sort of came back to something you mentioned before, Mark, where you mentioned that this belief, like, let's use the ice cream example. I believe that because I've eaten ice cream before, next time I taste it, I'm going to enjoy it. That's obviously, right, once again, something that's built upon induction. You made the argument that that's a sort of habit of like the synapses being reinforced over and over again. But I would argue that unless that induction is contained causally within the empirical propositions, you don't have that causality reinforcing those, those synapses to have those kinds of thoughts. The habits that you would form would just be, for example, I've eaten ice cream. And so the next time you eat ice cream, you'll be like, yep, that's ice cream. That's what I've eaten before. You'll have the memory, but you'll never have that predictive, inductive ability to predict in the future of like, oh.
That's just the way the brain works. That's what it does.
I don't think we can. Well,
just let me finish. It is a prediction machine. That's what it does. It fires the neurons and it strengthens the synapses based upon how often that synapse is used. So it will let others wither that's not used. That's why addiction is so particularly difficult to beat. It's because that synapse is strengthened and strengthened and strengthened until it is the normal response of that person, because the whatever they're feeling can be overcome by whatever it is that they're doing. So you're sort of just saying, well, nothing says that synapse has to be strengthened. Correct, but that's how that is literally how the brain works.
It sounds that's the thing. You're just sort of saying now it's like, well, that's just how it works. No further questions to be asked. You're basically invoking a brute fact here. You haven't actually given a causal explanation.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
If you're saying that, well, yeah, because if you're saying, well, that's just how it works.
Fact. I mean, I'm sure a neurologist can explain to you how the actual neurons are fired and how that strengthens the synapses, but I'm not a neurologist. But they have an explanation as to why the brain works as it works. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of questions there, right? There's definitely a lot of unknowns, but we understand why this physical process of developing these connections occurs, and why, if the connection occurs, and the more it occurs, the more it is likely to be repeated. That's not sort of something we don't understand. I'm not saying that, hey, it's a brute fact. Well, I'm not sure what you're getting at then.
Well, because if you're saying we understand how the processes are purely physical because the synapses behave in a certain way, and yet you can't explain certain phenomenon that is going on, and it seems to require something that's a little bit more non-physical, you're just saying we understand that the synapses do the physical thing, and it's purely physical. Pay no attention to anything immaterial going on behind the curtain, but then you'll just...
No,
well,
you haven't demonstrated that to be non-physical. You've just said, hey, because you don't understand it, I'm going to insert into this gap something non-physical. Because in the past, we didn't even understand how synapses work. In fact, most of I believe in the past, some people thought that the thinking was done in the heart because that's where you feel it. So that's to say that back in the past, when we didn't understand this, then the synapses and the neural connections must have been non-physical. No, we just didn't understand it. You're doing a sort of God of the gaps fallacy where you're sort of saying, hey, because we don't understand it, I get to insert that it's something material. No, you've got to show that.
No, I actually think you're doing the actual God of the gaps fallacy, because what you're doing here, you can only make that argument you're making from assuming that physicalism is the default worldview.
I was going to say, you're doing the reverse.
Yeah. So
I don't
you're
see
saying
how.
You're saying
I don't
that
see how either.
You're saying that physicalism. Well, yeah, let me explain it. You're saying that physicalism explains the mind. And then we have something that physicalism can't explain. And you'll say, well, yeah, of course physicalism explains it. It explains everything. It just, it just does.
That's Mark's argument. Anyway, can I ask a question that takes us on a different track? It's the same
just
topic.
Before you do that, Leo, can I just address that for 1 second?
Just hold your question there, Leo.
Yeah, I think
Okay, so we both agree that the physical world exists, and we both agree that brains exist and they do these things to learn. You're suggesting something above and beyond that physical world. I'm not. I'm just saying, hey, we're aware of these physical things, and it could well be the case that it's nothing physical. I'm not saying it can't be non-physical. What I'm saying is, for me to believe it's non-physical past what we already understand, you've got to show this non-physical thing. And I don't know how you do that, but that's not my problem. I'm not the one claiming that there's something non-physical. That's why I'm not doing God of the Gaps.
You're doing
not
this
claiming that it's only physical.
Yeah, I don't want to do, because again, Leo wanted to say what he wanted to say, but you're doing this from the, first of all, empiricist perspective that takes this almost axiomatically. The thing is that I would argue,
like I said, it's not about empiricism. This is not what religious faith and belief is supposed to be about. It's not.
Well, I'm not saying it's faith either. I would argue that from a rationalist perspective, there are certain I think in order to have this discussion, we actually have to have maybe a bit more of a talk about how we define physical and how we define immaterial. Because when I say immaterial, I get the sense that maybe you think I'm talking about wispy sort of ghosts or something like that. When I say physical, I simply mean that which is verifiable through the five senses. So like the reason why I know this water bottle, for example, is physical is because I can touch it and I can see it, I can taste it or whatever, and all that sort of stuff.
Is momentum physical?
I would say no.
Okay.
Again, this is
I wonder why it's a number in like almost every important physical equation if it's not a physical.
I would argue numbers aren't physical either.
Well, no, I'm not talking about the numbers. I'm talking about what the numbers represent. Is mass physical?
Yeah, I would. Mass, would be physical. Mass is something.
Yeah, but you can't detect it with the five senses.
Right.
You can measure it, and
but not with the five senses.
Yeah, not with your five senses.
Same with momentum. You can't like hold momentum in your hand. You can't
exactly.
momentum.
Exactly. You can't hold momentum in your hand. Is a black hole
physical?
What I was doing was challenging the way that you define physical as what we like can do with our senses. It's not really what most metaphysicians that I know would mean by physical. Now, physical is there isn't like one univocal definition of it. Metaphysicians have debated for a long time over what physical means. That being said, two things. Number one, I think that physical can be defined. And number two, I still think everybody kind of has an idea of what we mean by physical and then non-physical, even if we don't have a rigorous definition. Now, for me personally,
I think we need a rigorous definition.
I don't think we do. I don't know many philosophers who think that we do. But I personally would define something's physical. I take physical and natural to just be synonymous myself. I know there's people that don't agree with that. It's just on them to give an argument for why. But I take those terms to be synonymous. Something is physical. If it's natural, it's natural. It's physical. There's just an equal sign between those. And so what I mean by those terms, I would say is something that is characterizable by objectively definable degrees of freedom. And degrees of freedom are going to be parameters that can characterize a system or a state. So if you can use numbers to characterize a system or a state in ways where everybody that characterizes it gets the same thing, you're dealing with something that is physical or natural.
Or if you can observe the effects and then sort of, observe the effects of it are physical, then the cause is physical as well. That we can establish that black holes we cannot sense with any of our five senses, but we can observe the effects of a black hole.
Can I ask the question I wanted to... No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that in terms of the idea that we don't need a rigorous definition of physical in order to have this discussion, if you're going to say that everything is physical and then on the basis of that deny mind-body dualism, deny the existence of God, et cetera, I think we probably do need a bit of a rigorous definition. In terms of I don't want to go into this because I want Leo to be able to ask this question, but I think that's in terms of because if we just assume that, for example, momentum is just physical because it causes the effects that we can observe, like it can cause physical effects that we can detect, and therefore that means the thing is physical itself. That does not follow And it means that you take it axiomatically almost that immaterial things can't cause material effects when
Well,
I'm
how
actually
would
trying
they
to
do
make an
that?
argument.
What's the connection between the immaterial? And this is actually goes to the question I was going to ask you guys is why cannot my mind affect your body causally? I mean, if it's immaterial, it's not, then that means that it's not rooted in me. Why can't I raise your hand? Why can we only ever raise our own hands?
Well, again, this comes down to our definitions of what immaterial means, because I would argue, once again, numbers are immaterial. If I have 2 marbles in my hand, that
I
number
agree.
2 is only contained to those 2 marbles. That number 2 isn't affecting something else that's a pile of 3 marbles, let's say, right? That's like the
But it sounds like you're talking about something abstract
at all. Yeah, it's not affecting the marbles at all. Like the 2.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about an abstract
properties of the marbles.
I'm merely giving an example. It's
yeah,
not
but the thing is that
obviously...
your examples, like numbers, are abstract, and the thing with the difference between abstract and concrete is abstracta do not stand in causal relations. So if the mind is abstract, then it doesn't cause anything in the physical body.
I would strongly disagree with that. I would actually.
But that's actually how it's defined in analytic philosophy. Like, I'm not making this up. Abstract are things that do not stand in causal relations, concrete. And this is why theists will argue that God is immaterial, but concrete, like William Lane Craig, because he believes that God caused the universe to come into existence. Abstracta do not stand in causal relations. That's what it means to be abstract.
Well, then I disagree with the formal logic, whatever's definition of abstract, because think about it, for example, if you have thoughts in your head, like, for example, the idea of the number 2, and it has no causal connections, that means that we are aware of the existence of things which disobey the laws of causality, which I don't believe is true. But let's take the idea of the number 2 in your head. Whether or not physicalism or immaterialism is true doesn't matter. It is still true in either sense that the number 2 in your head, like when you think of it, when you picture it in your head, the number 2, in an abstract sort of sense, that obeys causal factors. Your brain is burning calories for you to have that thought. Your mind, probably, because I wouldn't call it a pure a priori concept, you probably learned it at some point, and there's a causal connection there. You can't have a purely abstract thing which obeys no causal reality, because then that means our mind's able to create things out of nothing, which violates the most basic laws of conservation.
But if the mind is abstract, then it doesn't cause things.
You're kind of mistaking the map for the place kind of thing, right? So when we're talking about concepts, they don't exist. Now, the thought may exist as sort of electrical signals in your brain or sort of synapses firing in your brain. That is true. But that's not the concept of the number 2. It's like if you say, hey, that video game character doesn't exist. It's just an abstraction kind of thing, right? It doesn't actually exist. But the data on somewhere is actually electrical signals, which does exist. So you're confusing the thing itself for the concept. And the concept of 2 isn't abstract. It doesn't exist, even though the thought may exist.
So I would argue that in terms of a causal, so like obviously the idea of the video game character didn't come out of nothing. It was, maybe I would have had to have thought about it. There would have been some causal process going on there. I would argue you're making an arbitrary distinction between the idea of the concept and the thought itself. Thoughts and concepts are the same thing. I don't know what distinction you're making.
I'm not saying that brains can't cause abstracta. I'm certainly saying that brains can give rise to abstracta. What I'm saying is the abstracta themselves don't stand. Like, if I imagine me pushing a boulder as an abstract thought, the boulder doesn't move. It has no causal relation. It can't affect anything.
Can I ask a quick question?
But you imagining that in your head is having a causal effect in terms of whatever processes are going on in your head. So, for example, with the video game character, okay, so your thoughts are able to just act uncausally? I thought you said that you don't believe.
Can I ask a quick question that might help clear some of this up?
Well, I was going to say, Jordan had a question. Jordan, if you can hold your question for 1 second, we'll let Leo ask his.
I didn't have a question.
Oh, I thought you said you had a question. Sorry, Leo, go ahead.
Can blue cause anything? And I don't mean an object or any sort of object that is blue. Can blue cause anything? And if so, what?
Well, if we're taking blue to mean the movement of like a light particle
No.
vibrating at a certain frequency.
No, that's a photon moving. I'm talking
No,
about
the
blue.
photon. No, the movement itself is the blue. The
No,
photon
what
itself
he's
isn't.
talking about
No,
the
no,
rays
is
that
the
hit
concept. The concept blue.
Like
the
blueness.
concept we
Can
have.
blueness cause anything? Can
not
heaviness cause anything? Can the number 154 cause anything? These things don't cause stuff to happen. They
It can
might be
cause you to have a thought
related
in your
to
head.
physical things, like blue is a particular frequency of electromagnetic radiation that we interpret in a particular phenomena way. But the concept that we attach to it, blueness, doesn't cause anything. It's a concept.
Your question is still, ironically enough, begging the question, because you keep saying we are attached.
What question am I begging?
You're saying, well, what is the difference between the concept that we attach to blue and the thing blue itself, right? The photon that's moving. I'm saying there's no difference between the two, essentially.
Well, the difference is the concept includes all shades of blue, but any one shade of blue does not include all shades of blue. So the concept of blueness could apply to the blue on my mouse, which is different than the blue of my lighter, which is different than the blue of the Bud Light, which is different than the blue of this pen. And there's a variety of other blue objects I could grab, and none of them have the same shade of blue. So the blue, they all possess the same blueness, though. The concept of blue. What does that
I'm a
cause?
little bit more nominalist. I'm a little bit.
I am a nominalist as well.
I'm not nominalist in the sense that there's, well, I suppose I would say there's no abstracts depending on how you're defining abstracts. But I'm saying that this blueness that you're talking about is merely a sort of language game that you're playing. And
yes,
so
of course.
There's no extra, but that means, yes, but then that means, no, there's no extra concept. You're just there's no extra concept. There is only the thought you have of blue.
You don't think
and there's
concepts exist?
Well, depending on how you're defining concept. I think thoughts exist, but not concepts, if that's how you're defining concepts.
Well, I would say that I think concepts are a mental construct.
Made of what?
Well,
Nothing?
they're not made of anything. They emerge out of a variety of neurophysiological processes.
I'm saying that those
kind of like my picture on the screen.
Oh, we're going around in circles.
Not really physical, but it's you've got photons and electrons and wires in the computer. Like all the processes of all of the physical stuff give rise to my image on the screen. But my image on the screen doesn't weigh anything. You can't hold it in your hand. It's not really physical, but it emerges out of a bunch of physical things doing some processes.
Like
concepts are the same. Yeah.
Well, first of all, that seems to concede my definition of physicalism, because you said you can't weigh the picture. So that I don't know if that's sort of conceded there. But also,
you can't weigh gravity, but that's physical.
You can measure gravity. You can measure the rate.
You can't weigh it.
Well, technically, if gravity is a wave, I would argue that's probably not physical then, depending on how
gravity can form as waves. But
you seem to be arguing that sort of abstract concepts are in some way real. So if I come up with an abstract concept of this magical baby delivering stork, that in some way that is real, or has a real presence in our reality, rather than just being an abstract concept in my mind, a construction, if you will, of the mind.
That's not exactly what I'm arguing. So I want to sort of unpack that a little bit. Let's take the example of the stork. I would argue that the stork itself, you've never had any experience of the stork. So no empirical experience gave you the idea of that stork. However, what your brain has done is remixed ideas in your head and combined them together to make what appears new, but ultimately its building blocks are ultimately stuff you've already experienced. So you've already experienced the stork, for example. Maybe you've seen one in real life, or you've seen a picture, or you've heard someone describe it to you. So that you've got the stork, and you're aware of the concept of babies. You're aware that maybe storks carry things. You're bringing these concepts together and mix-mashing them, but you're not inventing a new thing completely out of nothing. You're taking what you already know and mashing it together. That's what I'm saying that our brains do. We can't actually invent entirely spontaneous thoughts that have absolutely no reference to substance, only less reference to substance. So let's say a unicorn, for example. I don't think unicorns exist. I've never experienced it. I don't believe that there is any substantive unicorn out there. But the question is not really whether the unicorn exists, it's whether it exists as a thought in my head, or if there's any reference to substance out there. So if there's an actual, like, something that I can touch and grab, and et cetera, that means it possesses substances, right?
Yeah.
Of like, extension and reality and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so all you're doing
not,
is
not
describing the
reality. I would
difference
say it all
between
has.
an abstract and a concrete. So you're just basically saying a unicorn is not concrete. But I could leverage the same thing against a god and say, hey, you've seen beings before, you've seen more powerful beings than other ones, some person is stronger than another. That is not a logical chain to go, hey, if you imagine the most powerful being that could ever exist, that is not an original thought either.
Well, I would agree. I wouldn't make that argument for God. In fact, I would say that it's possible that it could just be personality or a person. We've had experience of people, experience of weather, put them together, and yeah, you could probably get a God. But let's try to apply that exact same kind of building block sort of theory, like I said, to the concept of therefore. What building blocks do you make in order to get that concept?
I'm not sure what you're asking. So if you're talking about sort of the way that brains do induction, as I've explained before, repeated circumstance induction.
Not induction. It's the ability to interpret. So whether it leads you to a conclusion of induction or deduction or any other conclusion, where does that therefore come in?
Well, you seem to just be pointing to basic sort of very, very simplistic cause and effect things, like that if I'm, if a dog has a Pavlovian response, if every time it rings a bell it gets a treat, then it will start ringing the bell because it hopes to get a treat. It seems like you're sort of asking about the very basic psychology and sort of neurology of humans and other animals for that matter.
It's not quite like that, because the idea that maybe
Why
therefore
not?
I'm about to explain it. The idea that therefore might arise out of causality is to ascribe it a different kind of therefore. Like it's a pain in the ass that we have two different ideas for the same thing, but same sort of word. But I'm talking about a different kind of therefore. If I have one billiard ball bump into another and therefore the billiard ball moves, that's causality, but that's a different kind of therefore, because there's no interpretive. The billiard ball is not interpreting and coming to a conclusion that it therefore must roll. It just does, not because of some sort of interpretive framework or a conclusion that it's
Well, that's
coming
just
to.
a billiard ball following laws, like just conservation
Exactly,
of momentum and things like that. And then you've got
But
friction, heat transfer, all sorts of things.
But you can make a trick shot by being very experienced with, repeated time and time again of hitting a ball and seeing how it behaves. And so when you say, you might as well ask, well, I'm not saying the billiard ball does that. I'm saying you do that. You pay attention. And the more you pay attention to how it reacts, the better you will be at predicting where that ball will go through repeated actions. So you may as well ask, how does a dog know that when it rings a bell, it's going to get a Pavlovian treat? It's because of repeated experiences of doing that and getting it. And that is literally how the mind works. You keep asking where this therefore comes from, but you might as well ask where does the therefore come from in a dog?
What does that question even mean?
A bell? I don't know.
Therefore just indicates the consequent following from some set of premises under a rule of inference. Like it's just an abstraction that we came up with one day when we started to develop formal and axiomatized logical systems of thought. I'm just very, very confused.
Let's say that we came up with it.
Let's let Jordan in.
I agree. We are. Yeah. It's weird because I don't think he's talking about therefore like in logic. I think he's talking about where does the idea for causal relations come from?
No, it's
okay. So, well, then I don't understand.
Well, let's all right. Let's move on from this topic. I might come back around.
I think
to it
Jordan was trying to inject there at one point. Jordan, bring us back to our atheist theism debate here.
Right. I was going to say this is not the point of what we're here to discuss. We're not here to debate physics and gravity and all that stuff and the abstraction versus concreteness of numbers and stuff like that. That's not what we're here to debate. We're my personal case, and obviously Aiden and I have slightly different opinions on, or slightly different goals, I guess, but my case is that I don't see why a belief, if I'm not making a positive assertion, and I know you are, I'm just saying, if
Yeah.
I'm not making a positive assertion that I know God exists, why is the
Mhm.
burden of proof on me to
I don't
prove
think it has
that
been.
that God
No, I don't.
exists when or why is the burden on me to make a falsifiable claim when I'm just stating what I believe? I just don't see why a belief has to be necessarily falsifiable.
Okay.
That's my
They don't
interpretation
have to be.
of what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah, you can believe anything for any reason. That's fine. What we're doing is sort of saying, well, if we have two conflicting beliefs, what is the most reliable way to find out which of them in actuality is true? And you sort of mentioned faith as a reason kind of thing, and that's fine. Like I'm
Mhm.
not saying you can't believe or disbelieve anything,
Mhm.
but what I am saying is that I don't think faith, or at least the faith that I'm aware of, I really should ask your definition of faith, actually, Jordan, because that can
Okay.
differ depending on who you talk to. But I don't think
Mhm.
that's a very good way to reason to believe things. And I'd like to know why you think faith is more likely to get you to the truth than, say, evidence and empiricism.
Um, well,
Well, just to remind, we are going to have a Q and A. We got about 10 to 15 more minutes of conversation. So,
Ooh, damn.
Mark Reed has asked
okay.
the
Let
question.
me just answer his question because I haven't gotten as much time to speak as the others. But
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say I definitely want to pass it back to you. The question that he asked first was for your definition of faith, and then
right,
the
right,
application
Yeah.
of that in your life. So, we'll let you
right.
answer that definition first.
Um, so for me, I guess this is going to sound kind of corny, I guess, but like I guess I separate factual truth from spiritual truth. I think those are two different things, uh so I think that um you can have uh I think spiritual truth is more about
What is that?
uh
What is spiritual truth? How does it differ from empirical truth?
Or factual truth.
it's more about
But that's a tautology. The truth is factual. So saying factual
Well,
truth is
let's
like
let him
saying the
answer the first.
truthiest truth.
Let's let him answer the
Yeah.
first question there before we move on.
okay. So um what I meant is empiricism. That's what I meant. So I should have clarified that. You're right. Um uh so spiritual truth is more about um the contemplating the nature of existence or creation, if there is a creator. Like I said, um I'm not gonna lie to you or be dishonest. Like you mentioned William Lane Craig earlier, I'm not going to make disingenuous arguments, which I think he does, to
Ditto.
try to one up the other side. I'm perfectly open to the possibility that I'm wrong, but I believe it. I have my beliefs and my convictions, um because it's what I choose to believe, and I don't really see the harm on that because I don't enforce my beliefs on other people. It's a very personal thing for me, and it does. I'll admit it does provide some comfort to me. That I do use it for those reasons, but also to try and explain some sort of metaphysical concepts. There is that as well. So spiritual truth is more about the essence of existence and getting at the heart of, hey, why are we here, what are we doing here? I don't I apply many schools of thought when searching for those answers, and then the particular school of thought within Islam that I identify with the most is Sufism, which is very, very focused on employing different schools of thought in various religions, various philosophies, incorporating that into their faith. So that's what appealed to me about it. So that's what spiritual truth means. Now, empiricism is what you guys are talking about, is more focused on material things and sort of, okay, I can concretely prove A, B, C, D, but I think that we can, I think that there is a way to believe and Mike slipped a little bit there. I think there's there's a way to prove, there's a way to believe in proven concrete things while also leaving room for the possibility of non-material metaphysical things. So I don't see it as too contradictory. I guess that's the best way I can answer your question.
Okay. Well, I mean, I get what you're sort of saying about spiritual truth being different than empiricism. So what you seem to be, and what I'm sort of hearing, is that part of it is pragmatic, that it helps you in your life, kind of thing.
Yes.
And really, I guess where I would come from is that truth for me is what comports with reality, or to quote Matt Delahanty, is basically what aligns with reality. So I want to have the beliefs in my mind reflect what is actually real in reality, that which actually exists. So when you're sort of saying that spiritual truth is different than pragmatism, you're sort of saying, well, these things are spiritually are real, but you're sort of the reasons why you believe don't seem to be because you can demonstrate them to be so. And so I want a reliable way to know whether your spiritual belief is correct or somebody else's spiritual belief is correct. Because you will have a spiritual belief based upon something, or a spiritual truth based upon something. Somebody else will have a spiritual truth based upon something else. And those two things cannot both reflect reality, because they are different. They are mutually exclusive.
From a Sufi perspective, and from I think certain sects of Hinduism teach this as well. No, all religions are technically correct because they were created by God, and God can't really, God basically doesn't make mistakes, is the belief there. I'm not saying you have to agree with it. I'm just saying that's the belief, that God doesn't make mistakes. So why would he allow for the creation of something that, like, it's not a mistake that, some people believe in Hinduism, some people believe in Judaism, some people believe in Christianity and whatever, that they are all, since they all aim for the same thing, there's truth in each one of them.
Yes, but the individual claims, that most of them are mutually exclusive. Like, for instance, if you're taking Hinduism versus Islam, for instance, is there one God or is there not one God? Right? Is there multiple gods? So those two things are mutually exclusive. Both of them cannot be true.
I think they're two different interpretations of the same thing. I think I look at that as two different manifestations of the same thing.
But that makes no sense. That's like saying that some proposition is true and that same proposition is false in the same sense. And then that's just two different interpretations. No, it's a logical contradiction.
It is either true that there is one God, or it is not true that there is one God. Like, those things, you cannot have both, that it is true and not true that there is one God. That's not possible. That's logically contradictory.
But again, I'm not claiming that it's true. But
the question we have is, how do we tell which of these claims, if any of them, are reflective of reality? Like, okay, just say, for instance, let's say as a hypothetical, there is only one God, right? How do we tell that the Hindus are wrong, that there are multiple ones? Right? How do we investigate
Well,
which of these
actually, according
claims?
to Hindu theology, the one creator God, Brahman, is one God, but Brahman has several manifestations. Like there's pantheism is actually what their system is. So they believe that technically
What?
there is one God, but Brahman manifests himself in various ways, and that is pantheism.
That is not pantheism. Pantheism is the idea that the universe is God.
Universe.
That everything
No, that's
pan.
panentheism. That's
No,
panentheism.
panentheism is the idea that the universe is contained within God.
Well, actually,
Pantheism
okay,
is the idea that the universe
there's
is
two different.
But I did want to ask.
They
a
are
quick question.
pantheists, though.
Well,
The-
sure.
But
I had a quick
Okay.
question for Ryan.
Yep.
How much time do we have left in the open discussion exactly?
We can move into the Q&A now. This
Shit.
might be a good time to move into the Q&A. It's up to you guys if you want to flesh out any more thoughts.
why, what's up, Leo?
Well, I was just going to kind of segue us into a different topic and just ask Aiden and Jordan, why did God permit the murder of 6 million Jews?
Well, before we move into that question there, Leo, let's just get a time
Not
confirmation.
controversial at all.
Let's just get a time confirmation from everybody, and I'll let you repeat your question if everybody's good. Jordan and Aiden, are you guys still good for time? If we go
Yeah,
a little
I'm still-
over?
Yeah, I got all.
Yeah. Okay.
Excellent, fellas. And
I can
Mark,
go a little bit.
how are you hanging out over there?
Yeah, I'm good, mate.
All right. If any of you guys have, any bladder interruptions, don't feel shy. Leo, back to you. You can ask your question. We'll try to do this for like another, let's say, maybe another like 10 to 15 minutes, if that's fine by you guys, before we hit Q&A. And I'll let everybody know, get your super chats in there. They'll be read first. And sometimes I read them with interesting voices. That's always fun. Back to you, Leo.
So why did God, I mean, he's supposed to be morally perfect and all powerful. Why did he permit the murder of 6 million Jews?
Well, if we're talking about why God permits evil at all, which I think is a bit more of a broad thing, because any particular example of evil that he would allow would have to come from the reasoning of why evil must exist or does exist in general. Again, this comes from certain metaphysical claims I would make about morality. I would argue that morality, or what is essentially on a metaphysical level, that it is necessary for the bad to exist in order for the good to exist, because otherwise it doesn't really make sense. If you don't have that kind of contrast.
So you're saying
in
evil
that
is
sort of-
necessary?
Only the potential for it. And also in
But
a
you can have
universe-
the potential without the actuality. So it could be necessary that the potential for evil exists and still not actually have any evil in the world, which I would argue is a better world than this, and God always seeks the best. So why didn't he just create that world?
Well, because I would argue he did, but also he created that same world you just mentioned, but also free will. This is where free will would come into it. In that world where the potential for evil exists and the potential for good, and we also have free will, it means we have the potential to choose the evil and choose the good. Now, is it possible that we would always choose the good? Possibly. I suppose we'd have to learn how to do that.
So you do think it's possible?
I do think it's possible, but I think
Do you think God is all powerful?
Yes.
Do you understand that
within the
to
bounds
mean?
of logic?
Yes,
within the
yes.
bounds of logic.
So you would understand God's omnipotence to entail that God can actualize any logically consistent state of affairs.
Yes, without violating ethics.
And it seems that you admitted a world where there exists free will, but all agents freely choose to never do evil is possible. So then why didn't God just make that world? You don't think it would be better than this one?
How would he do that without violating the free will?
Because we're still freely choosing to never do evil.
But not if he's forcing us to choose never to do evil.
But he's not forcing us.
That's a
We're freely choosing
Okay.
to do evil. He's
So
creating
we're
the
freely-
world in which we freely choose to never do evil.
Okay.
There's
And
no
if we
contradiction there.
Okay, but you'll. Okay. Well, then, if in this world you've created, right? Or I guess we're both creating it a little bit. In this world, it is possible to do evil, but also to not. And God creates it so that we're freely choosing not to do evil. What mechanism is stopping us from just choosing to do evil?
Our free will. We're freely choosing not to do evil. It's possible that there could
Okay.
be a world. God can actualize any logically possible world, so then he could have made that world. Why did he not?
Well, because I think I've pointed out a logical contradiction in your point there, that if we do have free will, it means we have the
What are the
possibility.
contradictory premises?
You're saying that we have free will, but you're saying that God should be able to make it so that he's supposed to enact some
Well,
sort
he's
of
making the
causality.
world. He's not making our decisions.
Yeah.
The decisions of
but-
the agents are to freely never do evil, and all God does is just create that world. He doesn't affect our free will by creating that world, and
Well,
only
what-
creating that world.
Because
why
okay,
are we
so
not doing?
let me see if I can clear it up. So God's created a world where I can't freely choose to fly, right? He's created the boundaries of that world, so that is not a possibility. So what Leo is asking is, why can't he create a world where you have free will and can choose to do whatever you can, but the physical properties of the world mean that, you know, you can't gas Jews, for instance?
Well, that is an argument, but I'm actually granting libertarian
okay.
free will, that all agents libertarianly freely choose to never do evil. So it doesn't have to be like sort of imposed on us through, like, say, physical laws or something like that. I would consider those impositions. I don't know if theists would say that those violate our free will. I would suspect they probably wouldn't. So I'm granting libertarianly free decisions here, and that all humans or all moral agents libertarianly freely choose to never do evil. Aiden's already admitted that is a logically possible world, and God can make any logically possible world. So why didn't he make that one?
It's only logically possible if we ourselves, the moral agents, are the ones doing the choosing. Once you start having God being the one
we are
who's
doing the
forcing us
choosing. We're the ones libertarianly choosing to never do evil.
Okay, but if that's the choice on us, then it's up to us to create that world, then, isn't it? God
No,
sets the
because
stage.
it's a
He gives us-
logically possible world, and God can create any logically possible world. Now, I presume a world where we never do evil is better than this one. So why God always seeks what's best? Why did he not make that world?
It seems to be you're sort of avoiding the question here. I just don't see. I mean, maybe you could explain to me a little bit better how it is possible.
Well, I can put
for
it
us
in
to
premise, conclusion form if you'd like, and then you can tell me which premise you disagree with.
It's more the specific. It's not so much the logically possible world thing. It's the part where you're saying God can give us free will, but we just, by some reason, I want that
By our
reason.
own reason. By our own reason. We
And
freely choose to never do evil. That's
Why?
libertarian free will. So here,
I don't
let me
think
put this in a syllogism because it makes it easier. Premise one: a world in which all rational moral agents libertarianly freely choose to never do evil is a logically possible world. Premise two: God can actualize any logically possible world. Premise three: God always seeks the best. Premise four: a world as outlined in premise one is better than the world we currently observe. Conclusion: therefore, God creates that world.
I think that included in, I believe it was the first premise, the idea that it's possible for that, for the world where libertarianly free agents to choose that world. It kind of necessitates the possibility of the opposite existing at the exact same time. In terms of the possibility, things about what is potential. Like if I flip a coin, for example, it is logically possible that it will land heads. But that doesn't necessarily mean that because it's logically possible that the alternative for the possibility, right? So if that coin happens to have free will and I can't force it in any way to choose to land heads without violating its free will, it seems like it's not up to me, or it's not my fault if that coin lands tails. I don't see how you're ascribing.
Yeah, but if you're all powerful and that coin had free will, you could pick the world where it chooses freely heads.
No, that's a contradiction. You're using your power.
So what's the contradiction?
You're using your will to impose a sort of causal effect onto the coin in this.
So what's the causal effect?
I'm just going to interject here because
that's exactly what I was going to say. Let's get you fellas back in here.
I want to answer Leo's question about the Holocaust. I would like to answer that. So there is, I like the way this was framed. There was a sheikh by the name of Mufti Menk. He's, I have some issues with some things he says, but he basically said that life is nothing more than a series of tests from God or Allah. I mean, we, like Aiden and I, believe in the same God. It's just, even Arab Christians call God Allah because it's just the Arabic name.
No, I get it. The Abrahamic God, yes.
Yeah.
Go on.
But anyway, the point is, I believe that the Nazis failed that test. And do I believe that God is always benevolent? No, I don't. Otherwise, why would he allow 6 million Jews and disabled people, including like myself?
So you reject God's moral perfection. You would say God is not a morally perfect being. God doesn't always seek what's best.
That is correct.
And that's fine. The problem probably doesn't apply to you then.
Yeah, he'd be a non-classical theist at that point. So
correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I still believe that God doesn't necessarily.
Is God mostly good though?
I can't say. I cannot say. I'm indifferent on that question, honestly.
That's fair.
I can't say. I don't know God's motives. I don't know what I can't get inside what he I don't know. But the point is that I don't think that, although I still believe that he doesn't necessarily make mistakes per se, I do believe that he puts certain people through tests, and I believe the Nazis failed that test, and I do believe that unfortunately those people that were put to death, I think they were just
Murdered.
I guess, I don't want to say like their lives didn't mean anything to God, but they were, I guess, used as collateral damage, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, they were just fodder,
Yeah,
fodder for the test.
I have a different objection to the free will raised by Aiden. I do have a different objection that doesn't involve free will, and that's that sort of natural events occur that I would classify as wrong or causing suffering, which, sort of under the definition I'm using would be evil. So, you can sort of appeal to free will in the case of, say, the Nazis, but, in the case of a volcano blowing up in somebody's face and killing a ton of people, you can't claim free will for that because that volcano has no free will. You would have to say that God caused that suffering and that death and destruction. So what is the reason for that if God is all good?
Natural evils. Why does God permit those
natural evils? Yeah.
So again, this is where I wouldn't invoke the free will argument there, but I would point out, like I said, that the potential for evil must sort of exist in order for the good to exist.
But why does he let it actualize? Is that better than it not actualizing?
Hang on a second, Leo. That means that sort of the way that he gets that to happen, in the end, it will be a good thing through revealing this evil to people, correct?
Not necessarily. It could just be a bad event that just sucks. You don't have to call it secretly good behind the scenes or anything. That's why we call it bad.
Then why do it?
So why let it happen?
I'm arguing that if the potential for good and evil exists, then first of all, in the Christian worldview, because I am a Christian, we do believe God, put us in the Garden of Eden type of thing, right? And that in that world,
always a fun discussion.
I'm just saying that in this particular example, God did create the space for where obviously there were no volcanoes and earthquakes kind of thing, right? That kind of natural evil just didn't exist. The evil that was actualized, why did evil actualize? The original, the fall of man, when Adam did the first sin, blah blah blah. That's when, because of free will, the evil was introduced in actuality. So it's no longer merely a potential, and that's where we have, the fall of man, etc., etc.
But why? Why did God let man fall?
Because
he didn't want that to happen, did he? Did God want man to fall? And if
no,
not,
but he
then
obviously
why
wanted
did
them
they?
to have free will because they have free will. Again,
but they couldn't have had free will and not fallen?
It's possible, but that just simply didn't happen.
So then why didn't God make that world? If it's possible, he can actualize any possible state of affairs.
Again, you keep trying to smuggle in this assumption that you can
have
free will, but also, I'm explaining it. You keep trying to say that you can have free will, but also God can create a world where where you make exactly these decisions. That's
Yeah, but you're making them. You're making them freely. Nothing about what you said defeats the idea that the decisions are made freely
Just a
because
quick little
they
fun
freely
fact, Muslims
chose
don't
to
believe
not
in
disobey
original
God.
sin. Muslims do not believe in original sin. So
Yeah,
just
that's fine.
putting that out there.
I'm
No,
not
that's
talking about
fine. No, we
original
get
sin. Original sin's a different concept, but still, free will being the cause of the fall is a separate thing from original sin.
So
Why
are
did
you
God
saying
let
that
Eve? Go ahead, Mark.
Are you saying that God has no control over volcanoes? Like, are you
I'm not
saying
saying-
that because man chose to sin, then it must follow that there are volcanoes? Why is that the case? Why could God not have created a world without volcanoes killing everyone and instead give everybody, say, a light burn that has no real ramifications?
Okay, so let's actually entertain that hypothetical for a moment. Let's say that we were living in that world. Would the argument actually change? Like, because it seems to be that you can only understand what is evil in contrast with what is good, kind of thing. Like, otherwise, it doesn't really.
I don't think so.
I can contrast with the evil that people, because you already made the free will argument that people do evil things. So we know that that is evil, right? We know we can get an understanding of evil through what the Nazis did and what Stalin did and all of these people did. So we don't need natural events in order to contrast good and evil anymore because we have people choosing evil out of free will. So why is God adding additional evil that is not controlled by free will in order to punish for the fall of man? I don't understand.
It's not a punishment, so to speak. I would argue that the concept of entropy, right, with things sort of falling apart, getting chaotic and changing their state, which introduces a sort of chaotic nature to the universe kind of thing, that would be introduced into the fall because of the way that, again, you're shaking your head at me.
Are you saying God has no control over entropy?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that.
No, he's saying that it all started when the original sin happened.
Let's let him say.
That's why I was trying to focus on the original sin and why God let that happen.
Again,
sorry, Leo and Mark. Let's let Aiden say what he's thinking there. And
again, this is just going to sort of go round and round into certain metaphysical claims about good and evil that aren't necessarily going to, purport with your worldview of what is necessary, what is not necessary.
I defined what I meant by good and evil. I said what I meant by those words.
Yeah,
can you repeat that, please?
Sorry, Aiden, in fairness, I'll just address your issue. It's because I want to get to this because Leo's entire argument hinged on the problem of evil. That was really what his sort of objection to saying a God does not exist was based around, correct, Leo?
Yes.
That's I just wanted to say real quick, my views, and this is not, certainly not representing like the Islamic perspective or whatever. This is my personal belief in terms of like creation and stuff like that. I don't necessarily believe that God creates all things, like all human beings and whatever, and all living things and whatever. I believe in, actually, believe it or not, more of a deistic notion of God set the processes in motion. Like I believe in evolution. I believe in all of those processes. I don't know why he did it. I don't have, I can't say why he did it, but I do believe in sort of I think it's called the domino theory. I don't know why he chose to flip that domino, but I do. That is the theory that I subscribe to. That okay, maybe he doesn't directly influence the creation of living creatures or even non-living creatures, but he set up the processes by which those things are created. So I just wanted to throw that out there real quick.
Any thoughts on that? Oh, let's go ahead.
Yeah, so my objection over a sort of immaterial mind would still exist for even a deistic God, but it also brings up the problem of how you distinguish between a deistic God, one that has no current effect in the universe and no physical impact or sort of no impact in the universe at all. He just doesn't interact with the universe, and one that doesn't exist. To me, there seems to be no possible way to distinguish between a non-existent God and a deistic God. So to me,
No, I
it
said deistic conception of creation. Like that is one
well,
aspect. I'm not,
does God
that is.
actually sort of participate in his creation after the creation? Is I guess what I would ask.
I believe so. Yes. Because like I said,
Okay,
I believe that. Do I believe in every instance? No.
right.
But I believe in what I call limited interventionism.
Okay.
I don't.
Well, that's fine. That's just not a deistic God. That's all. I just
Mhm.
want to sort of clarify that a deistic God is one that is
I
removed
just mean
from
like
the
what I
creation.
meant is like it's deists that technically believe in the domino theory, tend to believe in the domino theory.
Okay.
So just wanted
Ryan.
to
Yeah.
put that out there.
Sorry about
How
that.
how much time are we doing left on the
I was gonna say
this
we can move into
remainder?
Q&A anytime you guys want to move into the Q&A. So if you guys want to keep
Could we
discussing,
each, before we hit Q&A, could we each get like a minute or two just to give some final thoughts on the discussion?
well, I usually do that after the Q&A just because the Q&A can generate a
Okay.
lot.
Can I do mine before, since mine is like really
Leo,
relevant to
don't
and
be
I don't want to.
difficult. Come on, man.
No, I'm just saying I don't want to wait like a whole nother hour to make the statement it's just because then it becomes pointless. We're so far removed. That's kind of why.
All right. Well, I mean, if you have something, I don't mind if you have something to say right now before we go into Q&A, and then if
Oh,
we
that's fine. Yeah.
if we develop some new thoughts by the end and you have something else to say, that's fine too. I'm not going to be picky. I'm like
I
you,
guarantee
Mr.
he will
Leo.
develop some new thoughts. I guarantee
I
you.
Well, yeah,
guarantee
but
you will.
this is something I wanted to say.
All right,
Just
Mr. Leo Phileas, give us your thoughts.
so, with respect to what Aiden was saying, it seemed like what he was saying was that original sin and the fall of man is like where all the evil in the world came from. It wasn't until then that volcanoes began to erupt and tornadoes and hurricanes and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, and that's fine. But all that does is push the question back further. Did God want Eve to eat the apple? Did he want original sin to happen? And if not, then why did it? So I mean, did Eve just like rationally fail? Was she deceived into eating the apple? If so, why did God allow her to be deceived? Why didn't he create her with cognitive faculties where she wouldn't be tricked into something? Or did she just like cognitively malfunction and just behave irrationally? And if so, why would God create an agent like that? So that just pushes the question back to why did the original sin happen to begin with?
I have to let them
I
respond
guess-
to that, Leo.
yeah.
Of course.
You
Of
stirred the
course.
pot a little too much there, so go ahead.
I'll
I would
just
just
add
keep-
something. I just add something
Yeah.
really
I'll
quick.
let you add
Sorry,
it, and
Aiden.
then we'll let
Really
Leo
quick.
respond.
Plus, it becomes worse when you in the story Eve did not have knowledge of good and evil. So how was she supposed to tell whether obeying God was good or disobeying
She's
God
just
was good?
supposed to obey God.
So
Doesn't need to know
first of all,
why.
Let's
no,
let
that's
Aiden
not
respond.
it at all. First of all, when it comes to the knowledge of good and evil, it's meant to be full knowledge of good and evil, not just like limited knowledge of good and evil. Again, because if you look at if you want to go by the biblical thing, it says you will become as God, knowing good knowing good and evil. So you would know good and evil in the same way God knows good and evil. So maybe that's not fully omniscience necessarily, but it's omniscience on that topic. And so it wouldn't necessarily, because obviously they were told, do not eat the tree, and they knew that it was wrong to eat the tree. So they had some limited knowledge of it. Anyway, as for the question that Leo Phileas asked, where it was, why did God just not force Adam and Eve to be cognitively...
That wasn't my question. I said nothing about forcing.
All right, let's let you clarify your question. 15 seconds, Leo.
Let's take the word...
No, I don't need 15. I already did.
Okay, cool.
Let's take the word forced and just swap it out for why didn't God make Eve?
Oh, I'm not saying that either. Why did God allow? Why did God permit it to occur? Especially you just said they knew it was wrong. She knew it was wrong. So why did she do it? Was she deceived, or did she just behave irrational? And in either instance, why would God create an agent that can either be deceived or cognitively malfunction? Why would he do that?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily cognitive malfunction, but if you're a being who's only capable of making rational decisions, that doesn't seem like you have free will. Again, I just don't see how
Oh,
you're
I think it is. It's
allowing
just you freely choose.
You say that, you say the words freely choose, but you're not allowing actual free will into the system. I think it comes from the fact that you don't actually
granting
maybe
it.
don't. I don't think you are. I think you're granting the
Well,
phonetics.
this
of
is
the
an
words,
internal
not the
critique,
concept.
so I'm granting libertarian free will for this.
And if it's an internal critique, then I can say that it is a cognitive necessity that she needs the ability to both choose wrong decisions and right decisions. She chose a wrong
I
decision.
agree.
There you go.
I agree,
Okay,
but why
there
did
you
she
go.
choose the wrong
Let's let
decision?
Mark in
She
here.
knew it was wrong.
Mark,
God
She knew
know
she
that-
oughtn't to do it,
Sorry,
but
Leo.
she did it anyway. Why?
we're getting close to the Q&A, so let's let Mark get his thoughts in here as
Oh,
well.
sorry.
Since-
Well, the question is like, did God know ahead of time that she would eat the apple?
Well, that's a bit of a difficult question in terms of omniscience. I don't want to get into that topic because that's going to be like a whole half-hour thing.
Did God want her
at
to
the end
eat
of the
the
day,
apple?
Well, I
Obviously
guess my
not, but
point
I'm going
is that if God
So
knew
then why
she
did
was
she?
going to eat, if God
Just
knew
hold
she
on
was
there, Leo.
going to eat the apple, there is no possible world where she did not eat that apple. Like if God
again,
knew ahead of
that's
time.
assuming. Well, not necessarily, because you can.
Oh,
Well,
there was
again-
a possible world
all right,
where
let's
she
let
didn't eat the apple.
Aiden speak, guys. We're cutting him
I-
off every couple seconds here. I don't
Sorry,
want to mute
my
you.
bad. Yeah, you're right.
Sorry.
You're right. No, you're right.
All right, go
Anyway.
ahead, Aiden.
I don't even. So wait, are we talking about the possible world, the omniscience thing, or is it possible to be omniscient and still make free will? Like, which thing are we
We're
talking
talking
about?
Is there
about
a
why
possible
Eve,
world?
why Eve ate the apple when God did not want her to, and she knew she oughtn't, all things considered. So then why did she eat it?
Again, if you want me to provide a causal account of free will, I could possibly say
No,
that
that's not what
maybe
I'm
it was a
asking.
completely arbitrary.
I'm
Yes,
asking
you are.
why
You're
she
asking
ate
me
the
why
apple.
did she choose? What?
To
Yeah,
eat the
exactly.
apple.
Why? What,
But she knew it was
what,
wrong,
you know-
right?
Yeah. So
So why
let
did
me
she do
provide
it?
an That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to give you an answer to that, or a possible answer to that. Why do we make decisions out of our free will? That's what you're asking me, right?
No, I'm asking why did she make the wrong decision when she knew it was wrong?
Well,
Because it was
isn't
out
the
of her free
story
will.
that Satan tempted her? That's the story, right?
Right.
Yeah, but then why
it
would
doesn't
God
matter,
allow her to be deceived?
It wouldn't matter because she still had the free will to either go along with it or not.
But
it just
she
kicks the
was
can further up
deceived.
the
She
road.
was tricked. God's punishing her for being tricked. He let her get tricked and then punished her for it.
If God tells you don't do this, and somebody says do this, and then you choose to do this, that's a decision you still made. Free will is still that didn't rob her of her free will. She still made the decision.
Wait, but if your daughter sent pictures to somebody, this is hypothetical, I don't know if you have a daughter, sent pictures to somebody online because they got tricked and groomed by an older man, but you told her not to, she should be punished for that? Or is it that she was deceived?
I would say that there would be natural consequences which would punish her for a decision. I wouldn't go out of my way to punish her or anything.
But was she deceived in that situation, and should she be punished for what she did?
Well, let me take that example that you gave. Do you think that the daughter in that hypothetical made a good decision?
No, I don't. But I also think that she was
then there you go.
deceived into making the bad decision. She made the
Yeah,
decision because she was tricked into thinking that it was the right decision to make. But you already granted that Eve knew it was wrong. So then why
Right.
did she do it?
Again, because people sometimes choose to make wrong decisions. Again, if we're
So
talking about free will,
she just said, I shouldn't do this. I know that I shouldn't do this. And I have the ability not to do it. But I'm just going to do it anyway for literally no reason.
I've met
That's
people like
cognitively
that.
malfunctioning.
We're going
Yeah,
around
it's
in
called
circles
behaving
again, Ryan.
irrationally.
Again, you're assuming that her free will must be strictly determined by the rationality there, and
No.
that's assuming the. Well, I just
Rationality
don't
follows
see.
from free will. We do the things we think we ought to do, right? That's this idea of what is good is an action guiding norm. It's what we ought to do. We do the things we feel that we ought to, all things considered. Like if you were in a park and you passed by the pond and you saw a child drowning, you know the child is drowning. You have the ability to save the child. And if you think I should save the child, then you're probably going to make an attempt to save the child. You're going to do what you
Probably.
think you ought to do. So I'm asking,
Probably, but not
Eve knew
determinable.
what she ought to do, but then didn't do it, knowing that she shouldn't do it, with no external factors influencing her decision, then she just cognitively malfunctioned. And at that point, the question is, why did God create an agent that can cognitively malfunction? Is that what he wanted?
Again, you're still assuming a deterministic process. I don't know
No.
how to sort of get.
How am I assuming determinism?
Let's let
Okay,
Aiden
let's-
respond
let's-
there,
let's-
Leo.
let's go back to the pond example. All right, you see a child drowning, you think to yourself, I should save that child, but then you don't. Is what I just described metaphysically possible at all?
Oh, of course, it's just irrational.
Okay, does irrational mean that you had a brain aneurysm or some sort of mental defect?
That's not what a cognitive, as in like your cognitive thought process is, your rationality, your intentionality, your normativity. That's what a cognitive, like doing something. So the thing is, in most of those instances where you ought to save the child, all things considered, but then you don't, is going to be as a result of extenuating circumstances that are changing the kinds of evaluations that you're making such that you don't save the child. Because in reality, you actually think that you ought not save the child, and then that's why you don't, in virtue of those extenuating circumstances. So if there were extenuating circumstances that made Eve think that she actually ought to eat the apple, then she didn't have the full suite of knowledge necessary to know that it was wrong, and then that claim you made is also wrong, or she cognitively malfunctioned. There was literally no reason for her to do what she knew she ought not do, in which case the question is, why did God create an agent to cognitively malfunction? Is that what he wanted?
I think you're sort of creating this sort of false dichotomy where the only way that you could make a cognitively wrong decision is that if there's some sort of malfunction, which you've not really described the mechanisms of that malfunction, right? So we were just talking about how brains were purely physical, right? I would assume then that under that worldview, that a malfunction is caused by something misfiring in the physical process. If you're saying that there's a cognitive
this isn't answering the question.
Well, I would like to get. I have to. Sorry, Leo.
Why she ate the apple, and the only answer I've got is, well, because she made the wrong decision.
Okay.
That's not really an answer.
In other words,
that's why I keep interrupting.
That may be the case.
In the short amount of time we have left.
All right.
Because you're trying to get me.
Sorry, fellas. I'm just going to put you both on the mute for just 1 second. I do have to try to get the other fellas in here. Jordan says he feels we're going in circles. I want Jordan to elaborate a little bit on what about the conversation is kind of causing him to feel that way. Pass it back to Mark, and then, like I said, maybe get into the Q&A unless there's another avenue we'd like to explore. But let's get you guys off the mute. So
I think
over to you, Jordan.
Well, it just seems like we're just fixating on one point that Aiden says, and then Leo will say something, and then it just goes back and forth, and then it just doesn't seem to be getting us anywhere. That's kind of what I mean. It's just like, and then they'll repeat the same points over and over again, just in slightly different ways. And then that's the perception I'm having. I mean, some people could interpret it differently, but the perception I'm getting is that what we have here is, I mean, Mark and I occasionally interact, and then these two are just talking past each other, and it just, I don't know.
All right, without the meta-analysis of the debate, let's kick it over to Mark there.
Yeah, so my personal opinion is that God would have known ahead of time that Eve would eat the apple. He would have known that it created a flawed agent that is not capable of obeying him, and he would have known that ahead of time. There is no reason why he could not have fixed that error so that that did not happen. But he didn't. So the only conclusion that I can make is that God wanted that to happen.
All right, everybody, we're going to kick it into the Q&A. I just want to remind everybody that we're going to have a live in-person debate, and we do have our Indiegogo link in our description where you can get all kinds of amazing perks. So I'll tell you about them right now before we go into the Q&A. Get your super chats in while I let you know what you guys can do. So I was going to say, what we do is let me just get this opened up, everybody. This thing's being slow. Trying to vamp off here. By the way, everybody, hit the like button if you haven't already. Now, behave yourself, computer, while I scroll through these. So, if you want your name in the post-debate credits, it's $10 USD, and we will put your name in the credits for the live debate that we are going to be hosting in Houston, not Houston, Texas, in Dallas, Texas. That was the last one. I got to get my facts straight, everybody. See, I've got my facts all backwards here. So if you want an embossed thank you postcard, 25 USD, you can get that from donating to our crowdfund there. Scroll down, you silly computer. It's being so difficult for me, guys. See, I have Canadian dollars, and I have to make sure that I tell you what it is in American. All right. You know what? You guys can click on the Indiegogo link because my computer's not behaving itself for some odd reason. And I'll also remind you that we have tickets for the live in-person event there. So get your super chats in, everybody, and we'll keep the conversation rolling. We only have a few super chats in right now, so if you get them in there, I'm sure we'll get to them shortly. Pointless Poppy, thank you for being here. It says for $4.99, when damages are made to the brain, changes happen in the mind. And when the brain is changed enough, all functions stop as far as we know. Thoughts on that, panel?
Well, it's even worse when you consider split brain patients. That's patients that have had a cut made through the corpus callosum. The two hemispheres are actually split off. And what you'll see is that the patient will literally have two minds that can disagree with one another over things. One side can be a theist, one side can be an atheist. So it's sort of this ideal of dualism where the mind isn't reliant on the brain, doesn't explain this phenomenon. And it, you know, and mostly when I bring it up, they make no effort to, but I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I guess as the group's resident dualist, it's often thought when we talk about dualism that we're only talking about the immaterial mind, but it's called dualism for a reason. The physical part is still like involved. There's obviously an interaction that's going on there. And so I don't see why it should be a surprise where if the physical part affects the immaterial and vice versa, I don't see why that should surprise us at all. I don't see how, you know, because you like, let's take the split brain example. All right, there's two brains that disagree with each other. I mean, I suppose it's even possible under dualism that the immaterial mind might disagree with the physical brain. There's no necessary issue or contradiction there. It's the question of, do we observe any interactions from the immaterial mind onto the physical that the physical brain itself just can't seem to explain on its own? And I would argue terminal lucidity would be an example of that.
Thoughts, Jordan?
I don't really have a lot to add to that, honestly.
All right, Leo, over to you. What do you think about our question from Pointless Poppy and what we've heard?
It's interesting. It's a lot like an internal combustion engine, where if you turn it on, it runs, and you've got the exhaust, and the camshafts move, and the valves open and close, and the pistons go up and down, and the crankshaft turns, and all that fun stuff happens. And you know, you can change the amount of air and fuel going into the engine, and change certain features of the engine. You can make it run poorly, kind of like the brain. You can change aspects of the brain and make it run poorly. But when you turn an engine off, the engine stops running. There's not some other stuff there that will keep going after the engine has stopped. When you put a flame out on a candle, there isn't light still someplace else related to that flame. When you shut a computer off, there isn't still some processing going on in some happy place forever. These processes have simply ceased. And I don't know why we should expect the brain to be any different from that, when that's, well, you know, kind of what we observe in every instance, like every instance, or at least most instances, where somebody has been shot in the head. Where the brain is, by the way.
Any other thoughts on that, panel, before we move on?
I would just, I wanted to say with Leotheus, I actually did like that example he gave, like computers, and for example, but if we liken the immaterial mind to being like a radio wave, and the physical part of our brain to being like a television, right? And we smash the television and assume, well, oh, we're not getting a signal, so then the signal must have been coming from inside the TV rather than outside. I think that would be an incorrect assumption to make, that just because the TV is not working, that the signal must have been coming inside the TV. I just don't see that.
How does the brain receive this signal?
Well, and also
we know how TVs receive signals. How does the brain?
It was a example that you can't necessarily say that everything that's going on is internal. I'm just saying you can't know that. Like, just
I actually agree with that. I think a lot of external factors play a role in consciousness, like external environmental factors, our perceptual senses. All that stuff's external. In fact, I would argue that a lot of our consciousness is largely built by the external world and our ability to interact with it.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't
and
disagree
the
with
sort
that
of
as much as you
receiver.
expect.
Well, could I chip in for a second?
Sorry, I have
The idea of a receiver is sort of, it's really betrayed by the split brain patients, because if you split a TV in half, it doesn't receive two different signals, right? It doesn't receive channel on one and a channel on, that isn't what's happening, right? Like, so the idea that it's just a receiver, and it's just receiving this signal, doesn't explain why the signal is broken in half as well. It's inadequate to just explain that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's funny that you mentioned the corpus callosum thing because not to get too personal here, but that's actually how my brain is. It was a birth defect, and I part of my corpus callosum is missing, so I technically have two brains in a way. So so I understand how that stuff works. Is my point, you know? So I kind of get what you're saying. I can kind of understand that.
All right.
there may be something you could. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that
Go
sounds
for it.
like super interesting, Jordan. Is there anything that like having gone through what would be then your views on how that kind of dualism work? Like, what's your experience of that? I guess I would ask.
Oh, it's been pretty hard. Especially when it's funny, we've been talking about visible versus invisible things and stuff like that, and immaterial and whatever. It's hard to this is a totally different topic, but it's hard to live in a world where they'll acknowledge overtly obvious physical disabilities, but when you're living in a world where they don't seem to be as willing to accept disabilities that are somewhat invisible, and it's like so it's really hard to prove to people. That's why it's funny. We talked earlier about I think Ryan, you were saying about the like Canadians being like serial apologizers. I'm a serial apologizer because I feel like I have to explain myself all the time to everybody, you know.
Why are you guys out here apologizing to Serial?
What?
I'm sorry, that was just a joke.
Well, we can move on to the
Gotcha.
next chat, but yeah, we'll try to keep everything rolling and make sure that everybody is treated fairly.
That went over
and,
everybody's head, didn't it?
I think so.
Yeah,
Serial apologizer, and I was saying,
No,
why
no,
are
I
you
got it,
apologizing
Yeah,
to
no, I
Serial?
got it. I got it. Yeah, no, I got it eventually. Thank you, Leo.
Oh, I thought it was
But
funny.
that is
Damn.
the term.
Darn dad jokes. Well, I see 290 of you watching, and we've only got, 116 likes. Smash that like button, everybody. What else are you smashing? Seriously.
Smash it like a Nazi's face.
My goodness, Leo. Yes, mute yourself after that. Anyways, well, you're on mute. It says on the thing. There you are.
Yeah,
You're
but
on
what
mute.
did I say that was so bad? I just said smash it like a Nazi's face. That's I thought that would be an agreeable thing to say.
I thought it was
today in America, maybe not.
Just get us triggered by the old YouTube algorithm, my friend. That's what we want. Anyways, I'm kidding.
I don't advocate for
civil
violence in
disobedience,
any way.
so I'm, you know.
I was gonna say, we got
Nazis.
different rules here in Canada too. That sometimes makes it so that content isn't available to us based on different types of censorship. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do want to be able to watch these debates on my own time, guys.
In fairness, I think Leo sort of, that ship has already sailed. Leo brought it up way before now. So
yeah, exactly. I was going to say
a couple of references are going to make it any worse.
It's fine. He's just trying to pick on me directly, and that's fine because I love you, buddy. All right, Sal coming in for $4.99. Would the atheist agree if God exists outside the physical universe? Our knowledge of his existence is dependent on how he chose to reveal himself.
I'm not sure what quote unquote outside of space-time is supposed to mean. That's like telling me, well, Santa Claus exists, but he's just north of the North Pole. What does that mean? That means nothing to me. What are you talking about outside of space-time? I'm lost.
Yeah, so yeah, I do agree with Leo's sort of summation as outside, referencing a place outside of space-time. I'm not saying that it can't exist. It just seems like you would have to sort of at least show that this place could exist outside of space-time, which would be problematic. But if they did exist in some way outside of space-time, they don't exist outside of reality. And if they do interfere physically with the universe in any way, we should be able to at least verify that physical interaction in some way, the effects of it, if we can't observe the God, this hypothetical God itself. If you say that it's using divine hiddenness to sort of say, well, you can't detect it, well, then there's no difference between a God that's making itself undetectable and a God that doesn't exist. I think it's far more likely that people made up these stories about a God than this God exists, wants us to know that it exists, and yet hides from us when we try and find it.
There's this. It's funny. There's this book called Flatland. You can search it up on YouTube. It's like an audio book. It's
Aiden.
kind of deals with a very similar sort of thing where it's like, if you're saying outside of space and time, you mean like some sort of maybe higher dimension. Maybe that's something I could conceptualize of what you're talking about, because our ability to understand, like, because we're able to interact with sort of lower dimensions in a certain sense. But it's a bit higher to conceptualize how exactly that works. But like, for example, if a fourth dimensional being in some way wanted to step into the three-dimensional world, we would see a three-dimensional object maybe uh, sort of popping in and out. It's like it wouldn't, anyway, it's the whole thing. I'll stop rambling.
Well, that's Sagan that you're referencing. Carl Sagan was the one that sort of was demonstrating flatland on a two-dimensional plane kind of thing, and you would be unable to see it, but it would still have a presence in that two-dimensional space. You would see this, if it was a cube, for instance, the two-dimensional being would see a square kind of thing. So this, as I said, this should still be detectable, and I'm not sure that I would agree that a God would only appear in the way that it would choose. I think that it should be detectable physically in our three-dimensional universe, even if it was a fourth dimensional being or something like that.
Well, let's use the example of that story. How did the character react when he saw the square? All he said was, "All I see is a square." There's no reason to assume any higher dimensions, that you're some higher dimensional being. So maybe we do observe. Huh?
That's not how the story goes. No, he's taken aback and amazed at this square appearing from nowhere, because with the flat land at two dimensions, well, with the sphere or whatever, he's amazed at the circle appearing from nowhere, because the sphere isn't present in the two dimensions. It hasn't like sort of dropped down into it yet. But all he sees is a circle, but he's completely amazed because this circle came out of nowhere kind of thing. That's the whole point, that we still should be able to see or observe the effects of this fourth dimensional creature in the third dimensional world. And that's my point. We don't see the effects of it.
But my point to sort of, anyway, I don't want to, sorry.
Yeah, sure, sorry.
I just wanted to say, clarify my answer a little bit, that I would agree with Mark. If we're talking about some sort of higher dimension or some sort of meta space, it's either going to be somehow metaphysically or ontologically connected to ours, or it's not. And if it's not, then I don't think it can have any ontological effect on our reality. And if it is ontologically connected to ours, then I would assume its effect is going to be causal to some degree, and well, we should be able to detect that. Because that hyperspace, that other dimension, is going to act as a causal medium through which it can interact with and behave with our universe.
All right.
I don't see why that wouldn't be detectable.
Any other thoughts there on the other side before we move on?
I was just going to ask Mark. Sorry, I'll let Jordan go. I keep talking.
Yeah, let's let Jordan go here, guys. I haven't heard from you in a while, Jordan.
Yeah. So, I guess my question is, what's the harm in believing something that is non-falsifiable, or believing in something that isn't, um, entirely empirical. I guess, what's the harm in just believing in something? I guess not. I guess not everybody shares my philosophy that it's more of a personal thing rather than, there are some people that want to, impose their beliefs on others, of course. Even though, in Islam, for instance, you cannot do that. It is forbidden by the Quran to do that. So it's funny how, some people, at least, in the West, scapegoat Islam as being a problem because, they cite Al Qaeda and stuff like that as examples of Islam. It's like those people did not care about Islam. They were a political organization, not, not really a religious one. It's like there is no compulsion in religion. That is a direct quote from the Quran. There shall be no compulsion in religion. So what is the harm of just believing in something if you're not, if you're not bothering anybody, you're not, like what? I guess I just don't see the harm in that.
Well, you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. If you're not bothering anybody, right? So a lot of it is dependent on the actions you take based on your beliefs. Beliefs never did anything to anybody. Whether I believe there's a teapot around Jupiter or whether I believe there's a magic unicorn in my room, it never affected anybody. But it's the actions you take based upon the beliefs, and the actions you take upon beliefs that are not in accordance with reality are usually ones that have a negative effect in reality. So, for instance, if you believe that the world's going to end because of what you believe, you may say, well, I'm not hurting anybody, but you're also less likely to, say, address problems like climate change or ecological disaster or things like that because of your beliefs. There are people who see the drying up.
I do believe in climate change. I do.
Well, I'm not talking about you, right? I'm talking about
all right.
If your beliefs are that, but you probably don't believe that this is the end of days kind of thing and the world's going to end, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't believe that we're in apocalyptic times. No.
Right. So that's an example where your beliefs aren't affecting the world in a detrimental way because your beliefs are different than someone who is absolutely sure that the world is ending in the next few years and would not address things like that because of their beliefs. And this sort of flows over to a lot of things. And while you can sort of say how Al Qaeda was political, you can definitely say that Islamic State or ISIS was a attempt to create a theocracy. And I'm not saying you agree with that. And most theists don't. They don't agree with that kind of thing. Most Christians don't, sort of act as if the world's going to end very soon. They're just, people get along fine. It's fine. It's the fact that those beliefs can cause you to take actions that either disadvantage others or don't address certain things that have a profound effect in this world. So I think it is important to have the construct of what you believe to try and fit to what is actually real as much as possible, because we can't be, we obviously
By the way,
can't
Mark,
know everything. Yeah.
The rapture is actually tomorrow, according to American evangelicals, apparently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't know.
Well,
I didn't get my RSVP. Did you? Like, what is this?
I don't know. I wouldn't expect one, quite frankly. But
again, American evangelicals, they're more interested in politics than any actual.
Oh, of course, I'm well aware of that. I live in America. I'm amongst evangelicals.
Yeah.
Well, this might be a good. This might be a good time to move on to the next super chat. Pointless Poppy asks, thanks again, Pointless Poppy, for your super chat. And everybody, get your super chats in there because we only have a few, and I know that they're spurring lots of juicy, good conversation, and I hope you're all enjoying it. But if you want it to continue, if you want us to keep engaging in this lovely discussion, get those super chats in there so that we can keep stirring the good old juicy pot of
Could I
discussion.
finish my point, though? Could I finish what I was saying?
Sure. I'll give you 20 seconds there, Jordan.
Okay. So, like with the ISIS thing, I think that marrying of church and state is one of the most destructive things to ever happen to religion. I don't agree with that at all, and so that's
agree.
why I don't believe in the concept of the state. I do not. I think that the only legitimate authority is Allah, and I don't recognize the authority of man-made states.
Well,
Whoa, big anarchy energy coming in here
Yes.
strong.
Yes.
Well, I'm also
Yes.
an anarchist, so yeah, I agree with him there.
fun.
You guys
fun.
should like ditch anarchy and read a little bit of Marx.
I've read Marx.
Yeah, I'm not impressed with him, honestly. I'm not.
Marx, Marx Reed. I didn't know there was an S at the end of your name. Sorry, buddy. No, I'm kidding. All right, let's let's continue on. I make the worst dad jokes. Everybody, pointless poppy. $1.99. If God is simply an abstract concept, it's useless.
That's correct.
Agreed.
Abstract objects don't
Yep.
stand in causal relations. Like the number 2 doesn't cause anything. The addition operator or addition operation, I should say, in mathematics doesn't cause anything. The derivative operator doesn't cause anything. These are abstract.
So, Leo, are you against the teaching of things like algebra in school? Because that's abstract.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not saying that these things are wrong. I'm simply pointing to them as examples of abstracta.
So I have a question about that.
I kind of disagree with the super chat. Like you can make a case that God is practically useful even if it isn't abstract. You can say, hey, if I live in a country that's very Muslim and say it's illegal to be an atheist, just this hypothetical Muslim country, it may be practical to say I believe in the things. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Leah. Yeah.
Which is the premise that I also reject, just clarifying.
It may be practical to believe in order to help you get through that experience or something, but that doesn't make it true. And for my money, or what I want is I want to know what is actually true in reality, not just what I wish were true or what helps me along, because that is sort of, I don't agree with that sort of pragmatic belief in something because it helps me out. I don't think it's useful, and I think it leads to down the track. Short term, it might be good, but down the track, you're contributing to an Islamic state, or you're making decisions that are actually bad for you down the track. I think that it's short term thinking.
I just wanted to quickly say, sorry, James, I only have 10 minutes left, just real quick. I might have to dip out in 10 minutes, just let you know.
That's all right. Yeah, my name's Ryan, by the way. It's just not on the
Sorry,
screen.
Ryan. Oh, sorry, I saw the James on the screen.
You've really gotten a lot smaller since the last time I saw you, James. I don't know what's happening. You must have been on one massive diet.
Yeah,
I got you back. You called me Aiden, so I'll call you James.
I was gonna say,
there you go.
I stopped working. That's true. I'm so sorry, Aiden, about the typo there. I stopped working out. Everybody, as you can see, me, James, I've shriveled up. I've only been working out my vocal box lately. That's the only thing that's really strong about me. Even when I have to stand with a guitar for too long, I get home and I'm just like, oh, give me a hot water bottle. It sucks being super skinny. Anyways, I should work out more, and James is probably going to line me up when I get there and be like, Ryan, what are you made out of when I get to Texas to meet him, which is going to be awesome. And I'm going to meet you as well, Leo, and whoever else wants to join us in Texas for the live event. It's going to be a great time. Farron Silas for $9.99. Thank you so much for your super chat. Keep those super chats coming in, everybody. We love them. Why do these debates with theists always have to go in talks about primacy of reason and abstraction just to show the evidence of God already? And then they end it, and we'll give it a Mickey Mouse. Shit, or get off the pot.
I didn't catch that. Huh? Something about the pot.
They said shit or get off the pot, but yeah, I was trying to be obtuse about it.
They're basically saying, why does it always get into logical arguments and why isn't evidence presented, I guess, is what they're asking.
Well, I'm the one that did that. The reason that I will oftentimes either ask for or put an argument in a syllogistic form is because it allows one or several people, just depends on the situation, to really look at what is being said, what follows from that, and where people disagree. It's just a way of really organizing what's going on, setting aside aspects of the meta discussion and other confusing language. Sentence, conclusion. What's wrong here? Where do you disagree? It makes it very, very simple to figure out where the agreements and the disagreements are, or where arguments may fall apart. That's why it's done. They are necessary features of discussions, at least good discussions like this one has been. In my opinion. I don't think there's anything wrong with getting a little formal.
Yeah, I would say also to the person who made that super chat that remember this is about the hard case for atheism, right? And we're talking about things like physicalism. These are metaphysical positions, right? I could provide, I guess, empirical arguments for God's existence, but it's like that's not really what this was about. It was more about, is physicalism justified? And then from physicalism, can you say there's no God?
We go. Reconnection successful. I'm not sure. We had a little freezing issue there, everybody. Sorry about that. Let me know in the live chat if you can hear me. Is my lovely voice coming through? I think we good. I think we are, Riley.
Yeah, you're coming through.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody, for letting us know in the live chat. I appreciate you getting back to us so quickly. Oh, we couldn't do without you.
Canadians must just have worse internet than us good old red-blooded Americans.
Maybe. I was going to say, I've only got, 1.5 gigabytes down and 1,000 up.
Even though the United States actually has a terrible Wi-Fi infrastructure.
So yeah, I got over a gig down and a gig up. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty good.
That's more than adequate.
Yeah. So it should be fine. Yeah, we've got great internet up here. Big Fang Flying Wayne coming in hot for $5. And thank you so much for your super chat. Like I said, everybody, keep them coming in. We've only got a few super chats here, and we are trying to support ourselves for the event coming up in Texas. So if you have a question and you're curious to ask it to one of our speakers tonight, fire it into the super chat and we will get to it. And I'm going to say it again because I love it. A big Fang Flying Wayne says for $5, infinite time plus space equals the possibility of a round square. God is a round square. Show evidence of a round square, theists, please.
I'm a little confused by that. The first thing I would say is that space and time might be infinite. That doesn't mean that logical impossibilities can be the case, because logical impossibilities being unobtainable, meaning they can't ever obtain, has nothing to do with any physical state of affairs. It has to do with conceptual state of affairs. You can't have something and its complete and entire negation obtain both simultaneously in the same sense at the same time. That just can't happen, no matter how much space and time you got.
Well, I think sort of before space-time is a nonsensical concept. You could say eternal. I would probably more describe it as atemporal rather than eternal, because if you have a situation like at the beginnings of the Big Bang where space and time weren't applicable, you can't really say it's eternal because there is no time to be eternal. I would say atemporal. Whether or not that makes it infinite is another question.
I messed up.
It's both infinite and...
I messed up.
Nobody's hearing anything I'm saying, are they?
No. I hear you, Mark, entirely, but I messed up because Big Thang Flan Wang says I wrote the does not equal symbol. I'm sorry, Big Thang Flying Wayne. I missed that. Infinite time plus space does not equal the possibility of a round square.
Okay.
God is a round square. Show evidence of a round square, theist, please. Oh, sorry, Big Thang
now
Flying
it
Wayne.
makes a lot more sense.
We went down the wrong rabbit hole, Big Thang, but you know what?
Okay.
We got some good conversation out of it.
I had a really good answer too. I had the best answer. I won't share it with you, but I had the best. Just take my
wait,
word
really
for it,
quick.
sure.
What was the very last part of that question? Please show. What was that?
Evidence of a round
circle.
square, theist, please. Mark, I want to hear what this best answer is. I'm very curious. You were very. Oh, I can't hear you, Mark. All of a sudden, everybody, I can't hear the speakers. Can you hear me, Mark?
Oh, we can.
I hear you. Yes,
we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. I lost you guys, I thought, for a second there. Mark, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, I'm not sure why a infinite time would get you to a round. So there might be something of that question that I'm failing to pick up. I think that sort of God as a logical impossibility, I'm not 100% convinced it's a logical impossibility. Then again,
Dang.
just because something's not logically impossible doesn't mean you should believe it. It needs, as Flying Bang Bruce Wayne says, you need evidence for it before you actually believe it.
Plan Wayne.
Bruce.
Flam, big thing, Flam Wayne.
That was
I can't remember.
That was the best impression I've ever heard you do of a Westerner. Right there. Everybody, we just heard it. That was great. You almost had it. All right, we're gonna move to the last Q&A that we have so far. Everybody, like I said, get those Q&As in there. I do have another question that I pulled from the chat beyond this, but we do want to try, like I said, to stir the pot of conversation before we let everybody go. Sonic Shroom for $5 says, "Sounds like God wanted sin in the world. He just wanted to blame its existence on someone else."
Why does God permit things he knows he ought not to permit? What all-powerful, morally perfect, all-knowing being permits things it knows it ought not permit?
I mean, again, I don't want to go back into the free will thing. Again, yeah, you say it sounds like God just wants sin. Well, that's why you shouldn't trust your senses, because they can deceive you. You got to go by logic.
Right, and I believe, like I said earlier, that we're being tested all the time, and I don't think that certain people are going to pass their tests, and certain people are going to fail. That's just the reality, and so I don't think so I think that's probably where evil comes from, is people sort of failing the test of whether or not to succumb to the temptations of evil. So that's more how I look at it. So he's permitting evil because it's a test of character. It's a test of will.
Well, that just makes it conducive to his will, which makes it a good thing. It ought to occur because it conduces God's will. So if it ought to occur, that's what it means to be good. So then it wouldn't be evil. It would just be good.
Well, that's assuming that God's will is always good, which I don't think Jordan makes that designation.
Right. I'm not making that case. That I didn't say that God is necessarily always benevolent or good. I think that, and I don't necessarily, and this is one thing where Aiden and I disagree. I don't necessarily believe in objective morality and things, or what was I that God is the source of objective morality. That's what I meant. Or that morality is even objective. I think that I do slightly disagree with that, but
I'm with you there.
But I do think that God has a benevolent side, but in my heart of hearts, do I think that God is always benevolent? No, I don't.
Can I quickly? Sorry, I do have to get going. I do have to leave. So could I quickly maybe just give like a quick minute ramble just to finish this off, kind of thing?
Sure thing. 1 minute for your closing discussion or closing thoughts there, Aiden.
Okay, so in this debate, we talked a lot about the issues of metaphysical dualism and physicalism, as well as the problem of evil. By my assessment, we didn't actually talk a whole lot about terminal lucidity and the problems that poses for physicalism, but I would argue that there really hasn't really been one way or another. Physicalism wasn't really proved in this debate, I wouldn't say. And as for the problem of evil, I would argue that maybe me and Leophilius could have a further discussion later on, maybe in the Discord or something, to talk more about, to get more into detail about the nature of free will and how that might run up against what he's suggesting there. And then other than that, I will also say that I did talk over a fair bit of people. I do apologize for that, but other than that, I did really enjoy this debate. And thank you to everybody for being here and having me on.
No problem.
Thanks,
If you
Aiden.
wanted to hang out for a couple more seconds there, Aiden, if you need to jump out, that's fine. But we'll just do our closing statements for everybody. So if Aiden, you need to go, that's fine. But let's go over to you, Jordan. We'll kind of pass it back and forth. So Jordan, 1 minute for your closing statements.
Cool, because I
Cheers,
kind
buddy.
of got to go too because my laptop is dying. So, but anyway, the the point I will go back to is that I think this discussion is framed a little bit wrong. I don't think it's necessarily about factual versus non-factual. I think it's a question of belief, and I don't think you necessarily need a factual basis for belief systems. I just don't think I don't see any. I just don't see why you need a factual basis for just believing something. In certain cases, like with conspiracy theories and blah blah blah, it might help to have some facts on your side. But in theological and ontological or theological, theological cases, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I think that belief in this context is a little bit more nuanced and a little bit deeper, and I think that that there's no inherent harm in just believing something. And I don't really, I believe that, you guys made some good arguments, and I conceded a couple of those arguments. I just didn't hear too many compelling arguments as to why my viewpoint is wrong, I guess.
All right. Before we hand it over to Leo, because I know you'll have another thought there, Leo, before we close out, Mark, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, so a factual basis for belief, is it required? No, you can believe anything for any reason. Beliefs don't necessarily need a justification, because if it was a justified belief, then you'd probably be claiming knowledge. But if you are going to make decisions in reality, you would probably want there to be a sound epistemology for your beliefs, some reason as to why you believe that. I mean, if you have a knowledge of physics and how wear and tear affects your socks, and that's what causes holes, you have a much better chance of addressing that situation than if you believe that magic pixies created the holes in your socks. Now, you're free to believe that magic pixies were the origin, but you're not going to have the same effect on the world as if you believe that it's just a physical effect of friction and all of these natural forces.
But I don't believe in the pixie thing. I think you're straw manning my point.
Mate.
This is his closing statement. Sorry about that, Jordan. Another 15, 20 seconds there.
Sorry, my bad.
Where was I up to? So this is sort of like, well, I have reasons for believing that there is no God, and that is what makes me an atheist. Now, I'm not claiming some sort of absolute knowledge from that, but there is a justification for believing that. And if it is in fact true that there is no God, then it is justified true belief, and it does actually count as knowledge. I think that sort of instead saying, well, I have a belief and don't need to justify it, you have a much better chance of being right if you go for the position that has a justification for it, and a rational justification at that. Thank you.
All right. Leo, do you have a 1 minute of new closing thoughts before we end our discussion?
Well, just in terms of the discussion that's been had, I'm still not sure how the existence of a priori knowledge is in any way, shape, or form supposed to indicate the existence of God. We never got an argument really for that. I never heard a response to the sort of what's called the pairing problem. This idea that if souls are what control bodies, or if substance dualism is true, then there isn't anything necessitating control over just our own bodies. If there is, given what that thing is and how it limits us. So why can't I lift other people's hands? We never got a really good answer to that. We never really got a good alternative with respect to how we can physically affect all these aspects of the brain and the mind. That seems to indicate that they're very strongly related. We never really got answers to that with respect to substance dualism, how that can account for a variety of issues, like you get shot in the head and you die. Simply accommodating things that the physicalists can actively predict is not, and that's the thing. All of these things are predicted by physicalism. They're merely accommodated by substance dualism. And we never really got a good answer as to why God permits things he knows he oughtn't to permit, like the murder of 6 million Jews. We never got a good answer as to why God couldn't actualize a world where all rational moral agents libertarianly freely choose to never do evil. We never got an explanation as to how God's actualization of such a world would have any effect on that libertarian free will. We never got an answer to why God would permit Eve to be deceived or to cognitively malfunction or to excuse me, or to commit the original sin to begin with. So there was a lot of stuff, a lot of problems for theism, at least as one of our opponents was defending it, that we never really got good answers to.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for your closing thoughts. Thank you, Aiden, for being here. I know you're not here anymore. Mark.
Sorry, Ryan, I forgot one thing.
I know you forgot one thing. I was about to ask you about the after show because I've gotten a couple questions. Mark, are you doing the after show?
I am, yes, I am doing the after show. I'll get you the link actually, so you can drop it in there. That would be, I'd really appreciate it. That would be fantastic.
I'll do it again.
I should be better organized and have it already, but there you go. Yeah, and sort of so Jordan, if you do want to rebut it or say stuff extra, you're more than welcome to come along and sort of argue your case if you do want to add anything else that we haven't gotten to, or if you do think I've been straw manning you, sure, absolutely, I'd love to hear about it.
Well, just that last argument, I thought,
okay,
the fairy thing.
There we go.
I won't start up the debate by sort of explaining what I meant, but if you do come along to the after show, I'm more than happy to explain why I'm using that analogy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, excellent. Yeah. Well, we'll close it off there. Oh, well, you know what? Fine. Let's have a little bit more. Jordan, what were you gonna say?
Well, I just wanted to say my laptop is dying, so I'm not sure I'll be able to participate in the after show, but I'll try as much as I can. I'll be there for a little bit, I guess.
Excellent. That'd be great to see. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jordan, for being here. I'm glad that we met. I'm glad that Brent had linked me to you and that you were willing to come out and have this conversation. A huge round of virtual applause for Jordan for his debut here on Modern Day Debate. We really appreciate you, buddy.
I'll do, like I said, I'll do more. I have no problem with that.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate it, and we appreciate Mark and Leophilius, of course. And like I say, big round of virtual applause for everybody that came out here tonight, especially me. No, I'm kidding, everybody. That's fine. I just enjoy hanging out. So as for yourselves, I know Josh was hanging out in the live chat earlier, who's my band compadre, who helped make a lot
Who's Josh? What kind of name is Josh?
Josh is Josh, my good band compadre. He moved away recently, but we made a lot of great music together, and I've been sharing it out through the Modern Day Debate, and that's what they've been hearing is his rhythm guitar playing and his drum beats, and then me singing and playing guitar solos. So if you see him in the live chat, give him love, everybody.
That's actually pretty fucking badass.
We are.
Also, you want to know a really fun fact? Do you know what Jesus' name translates literally to from Yeshua? Do you know what it translates to in English?
Yeah, he's my favorite Jesus.
Joshua.
Yeah,
the name translates to Joshua.
Yes.
Jesus was a Josh.
That's true.
Yes.
Jesus,
if you're still in the chat there. Sorry. Jesus, because his name's Josh in the chat. Jesus, if you're there in the chat, I appreciate it.
The Arabic name for Jesus is Isa, so that's pretty close. Isa, Yeshua, sort of close.
Oh, yeah. And also, before we let everybody go, I want to remind you that we are having our live in-person debate. It's going to be in Texas. We have 2 different types of tickets. There's a VIP ticket where you get access to an additional debate between David Wood and Kenny Bomer, along with a special dinner as well, a signed emblem page, and a VIP lanyard. How awesome is that? You know you want to come out and you want to hang out with us, right? Or tell me that I suck. That's fine. I don't care. Let's have a good time no matter what, everybody. So just remind you guys, as our Lord and Savior here on the channel, James tells you, keep on sifting the reasonable out from the unreasonable, and we will see you next time for more juicy debates. Good night, everyone.
Subscribe.